Production by Liang Uncle Tom's Cabin, author, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Volume 1. Chapter 1 introduces readers to a man with lofty ideals, a cold afternoon in February. Two gentlemen were sitting alone drinking wine in a well-furnished restaurant in Prussia, Kentucky. There were no servants present, but the two gentlemen sat close to each other on chairs, seemingly discussing some serious topic. For convenience's sake, so far we have been talking about two gentlemen. However, when we examine one of them strictly speaking, he does not appear to be one of these people. He was a short, heavy-set man, with coarse features and that air of self-importance that is the hallmark of lowlives trying to make their way in the world. He was overly dressed, wearing a gorgeous colorful vest, a blue scarf dotted with yellow spots, and his tie was tied in a showy manner, which was very consistent with his overall temperament. His hands were thick and big, covered with rings. He also wore a heavy gold watch chain. Hanging from the chain was a bundle of seals of various sizes and colors. His conversation was conducted with an ease and complete disregard for Murray's grammar. It was embellished from time to time with various profane expressions, which we will not transcribe even for the sake of vividness. His companion, Mr. Shelby, seems like a gentleman. The arrangement of the house and the general atmosphere of the household suggest a relaxed and even affluent environment. As we said before, the two were having a serious conversation. Said Mr. Shelby, "I should arrange it this way." "Mr. Shelby," he said, "I can't trade like this, I really can't," he said, holding a glass of wine between his eyes and the light. "Why, in fact, Haley, Tom is an unusual fellow. He's worth his weight in gold anywhere, steady, honest, able, and runs my whole farm like a clock." Haley said, "You mean as honest as a nigger?" "No, I mean, Tom is really a kind, stable, sensible, religious man. He became a believer at a camp meeting 4 years ago. I believe he really did. Since then, I entrusted him with everything I had, money, house, horses. Having him come and go all over the country, I have always found him to be sincere and upright in everything he did." Some people don't believe that Shelby had devout black slaves. Harley waved his hand frankly and said, "But I do. There was a black slave in the last shipment I took to Orleans." Listening to him pray was like being in a meeting. He was gentle and quiet. He also made me a lot of money, because I bought him cheap from a guy who wanted to sell him, so I made $600 on him. Yeah, I think religion is a valuable thing in a nigger. As long as it's true, there's nothing wrong with it. Well, Tom has real ability, if anything, added the other. Last fall I asked him to go to Cincinnati alone to help me with my business and brought back $500. "Tom," I said to him, "I believe you because I think you are a Christian. I know you won't lie." Sure enough, Tom came back, and I knew he would. "Ah, the master trusts me, I can't, they told me about this. I have to say, I feel very sorry for Tom. You should let him bear all the debt. You would if you had any conscience, Haley, okay? I have the greatest conscience a businessman can have, you know, just a little, like an oath," the businessman said jokingly, "and, for friends, I'm willing to do anything that makes sense. But, you see, this guy, he's too harsh on a guy, too harsh." The merchant sighed thoughtfully and poured some more brandy. "Well, then, Haley, what's your deal?" Mr. Shelby said after an uncomfortable silence. "Well, don't you have a boy or a girl to be with Tom?" "Humph. I'm reluctant to sell it for a penny. To be honest, I'm only willing to sell it when I have absolutely no choice but to do so." I don't like to give up any of my hands, that's a fact. At this time, the door opened, and a little boy of 4 or 5 years old walked into the room. His appearance was very beautiful and very attractive. His black hair is as thin as silk, and the shiny curls hang down on his round and sunken face. His big black eyes are full of fire and tenderness, looking out from under the thick and long eyelashes, looking at him curiously. Watching everything in the room. A piece of carefully crafted. His neatly fitted scarlet and yellow plaid Mary robe accentuated his dark and plump beauty. "Hello, Jim Crow." Mr. Shelby whistled and gave him a bunch of raisins. "Pick it up." The child chased after him with all his strength. "Prize run." The owner laughed from the sidelines. "Come here, Jim Crow," he said. The child came over, and the owner patted his curly head and tapped his chin. "Now, Jim. Show this gentleman how you can sing and dance." The boy sang a wild and grotesque song common among black people with a rich and clear voice. Along with the singing, his hands, feet and whole body also sang. Made many funny moves. All movements are perfectly coordinated with the music. "That's great," Haley said, throwing him a quarter of an orange. "Now, Jim, walk like old Uncle Carjo did when he had rheumatism," said the master. The child's flexible limbs instantly became deformed and twisted, and his back was hunched. Holding the master's stick in his hand, he staggered around the room, his childish face raised high, and he spit from right to left in imitation of an old man. Both gentlemen burst into laughter. "Now, Jim," his master said, "let's see how the old elder Robbins leads the singing of hymns." The little boy stretched his chubby face and began to hum the melody of the hymn with his nose, with a serious expression and calmness. "Okay. Wow. Hurrah. What a young man." Harry said, "I promise. That kid is a character. Let's do this." He suddenly patted Mr. Shelby's shoulder with his hand and said, "Put the boy in and I'll settle the matter, I will. Come on, now, if that's not the right thing to do." At this time, the door was gently pushed open. A young quarterback woman, apparently about 25 years old, walked into the room. As long as the child looks at her, he can recognize her as the child's mother. She has the same rich, full, dark eyes with long eyelashes, the same smooth black hair. The brown of her complexion gave way to a perceptible blush on her cheeks, which deepened as she caught sight of the strange man looking at her boldly and unabashedly. Her clothes were as neat and fitted as possible, highlighting her delicate figure, her slender hands. The slender feet and ankles have not escaped the sharp eyes of businessmen. The master said, "How about it, Eliza?" She stopped and looked at the master hesitantly. "I'm looking for Harry, please, sir." The boy ran towards her, showing off his trophy. These trophies he collected in the skirt of his robe. Mr. Shelby said, "Okay, let's take him away." She hurriedly hugged the child and left. Jupiter, the merchant, turned to him and said in admiration, "This is a good thing. You can always make a fortune on that girl from Orleans. I have seen more than 1,000 girls, and you have bought them all, and none of them are more beautiful than her." Mr. Shelby said dryly, "I don't want to get rich off her." To change the subject, he uncorked a new bottle of wine. "Ask your companions what they think of the bottle." "Capital, sir, the first cut," said the merchant, then turned around, patted Shelby's shoulder with a knowing hand, and added, "Come on, how are you going to trade this girl?" What should I say? What do you want? Mr. Haley, she can't sell it, Shelby said. My wife won't sell her. Alas, alas. Women always say things like this because they haven't calculated. Just tell them that a person's the weight of gold can buy as many watches, feathers and jewelry as they want, and they will change their minds, I think. I'm telling you, Haley, you can't talk about it. If I say no, I just can't, Shelby said firmly. Okay, but you have to give me this kid, said the businessman. You have to admit that I spent a lot of money on him, Shelby said. What do you want with this kid? What's wrong? I have a friend who wants to be in your profession. He wants to buy some handsome boys and raise them to the market. They are totally fancy things, sold to rich people as waiters or something like that, and the rich can spend the money buys a handsome boy. A really handsome boy to open the door, wait on and take care of the guests. It will bring you a good place to go. They'd fetch a good price, and since this little rascal was a hilarious musician, he was the perfect fit. I would rather not sell him. I am not willing to take this child away from his mother, sir. Oh, is that so? I totally understand. It's so unpleasant to be around women sometimes, and I always hate it when you are so shrill and shrill. They are annoying, but because I am in business, so I generally avoid them, sir. Now, if you give that girl a day off, or a week, or longer, then things can be wrapped up quietly, over before she gets home. You can buy your wife some earrings, or a new dress, or something like that, to make it up to her. I'm afraid not, God bless you, yes. You know, these little animals are not like white people, they get over it and just do things right. Now, they say, Haley said, feigning candor and secrecy. This kind of business can harden people's feelings, but I've never found that to be the case. The truth is, I can never do business the way some people do. I've seen them pull a woman's child out of her arms, and putting him out there for sale. She kept screaming like crazy. This is very bad policy and can damage items and sometimes make them completely unfit for work. I once knew a very pretty girl in Orleans who was ruined by this practice. The people she was trading with didn't want her kids, and she was a real classy kind of person. When she was full of blood, I tell you, she held the baby in her arms and talked non-stop. They took the child away and locked her up, and she went crazy and died within a week. Sir, $1,000 was wasted just because of lack of management. It's always best to do the humane thing. Sir, this is my experience. The businessman leaned back in his chair, clasped his hands together, and looked impassioned. Apparently he thought he was the second Wilberforce. The gentleman seemed to be very interested in this topic, because just as Mr. Shelby was peeling an orange thoughtfully, Harley suddenly said something again, speaking more and more carelessly, but he seemed to be driven by the power of facts and said a few more words. It doesn't look good now for a person to brag, but what I said is the truth. I believe the niggers I bring are the best, or so I'm told. If I've had it once, I reckon I've had it 100 times, all good times, very fat, and I've lost. There were fewer black slaves than anyone else. I attribute it all to my management, sir, and to human nature. Mr. Shelby, I may say, is the great pillar of my administration. Mr. Shelby did not know what to say, so he could only say, indeed. Now, my ideas are laughed at, sir. They were not fashionable, nor common, but I persisted, sir, I persisted. And fulfilled them well, yes, sir, I may say, they have paid their way. The businessman laughed at his jokes. These interpretations of human nature were so vivid and novel that Mr. Shelby couldn't help but laugh. Maybe you will laugh too. Dear reader, but you know, human nature manifests itself in all kinds of weird ways nowadays, and people with human nature say weird things and do weird things all the time. Mr. Shelby's laughter encouraged the businessman to move on. Oddly enough, I've never taught this to others. Tom Locker was my old partner in Natchez. He was a smart man, but he was very cruel to the Negroes. It was a matter of principle. You see, a good-hearted man will not run out of food. It was his system. Gentlemen. I often chat with Tom. Why, Tom, I said. What's the use of banging your girls on the head when they cry? That's ridiculous, I said, and it's not going to help at all. I said, I don't think there's any harm in them crying. It's nature, I said, if nature can't be vented in one way, then use another way. Besides, Tom, I said, it will only irritate your girls. They will become sickly, and their mouths will droop, and sometimes they will become ugly, especially the swarthy girls. They will become ugly. This is all the fault of the devil. Now, I said, why can't you coax them into saying something nice? I said, Tom, trust me, a little human touch will go a lot further than all your nagging, and it will pay better. But Tom just couldn't get the idea. He gave me so many benefits that I had to sever ties with him. Although he is a kind-hearted guy and a fair businessman. Do you think your management methods are better than Tom's? Mr. Shelby said. Yes, sir, I can say that. You see, if I can help it, I will pay a little attention to the unpleasant part. For example, selling young people, etc. Keep the girls out of the way, don't let them see it, don't let them think about it. You know, when things are done neatly and there is no other way, they will naturally get used to it. You know, white people have developed the habit of raising children to provide for old age since they were young. And niggas, you know, they have been raised well without any bystander status, so these things will be easier. Mr. Shelby said, I'm afraid my child was not raised well. Probably not. You Kentuckians are very rough with the black slaves. You mean well to them. But it is not true kindness after all. A nigger, you see, cut up and wandered about the world, sold to Tom and Dick and God knows who else, and to give him ideas and expectations and raise him too well is not kindness to him, because the ups and downs and tribulations in the future will be even harder for him. I dare say. If your slaves on your plantation were singing and screaming like they were possessed, your slaves would be scared to shit. You know, Mr. Shelby, every man has his own way, and I think I deserve the way I treated my Negroes. Mr. Shelby said. Satisfaction is a happy thing. He shrugged slightly, with obvious displeasure. Well, said Haley, after they had all picked nuts in silence for a season, what do you say? Discuss it. At the same time. Haley, if you want this to proceed in the quiet manner you say you do, you'd better keep your business from being known around here. This matter will reach the ears of my children. If my children find out, I guarantee you that they will not let you go easily. Oh. Of course, Mom. Certainly. But I'm going to tell you. I'm very anxious now, and I want to know as soon as possible what I can rely on, he said, getting up and putting on his coat. Mr. Shelby said, well, call between 6 and 7 this evening. You will get my answer. Finished. The businessman bowed and left the apartment. I should like to kick this fellow down the steps, he said to himself, for his shameless assurances, but he knows what an advantage he gives me. If anyone says to me, I should sell Tom to the South. Sell to one of those rogue traders, and I'll say, is your servant a dog, that he can do such a thing? And now, I see it will be a matter of time, and with Eliza's child, I know I will definitely have a big quarrel with my wife, and with Tom. It is only natural to pay back debts. This guy saw his advantage and was going to do something big. Perhaps the mildest form of slavery can be seen in Kentucky. Quiet and gradual agricultural production generally prevails in Kentucky and does not require the requirements of more areas in the South. That periodic rush and stress. This makes the Negro's task more wholesome and reasonable, while the master is content with a more gradual mode of acquisition, without those cruel temptations by which fragile human nature is always tempted when the prospect of sudden and rapid gain is weighed in the balance. Conquered by temptation. And there is no more important support than the interests of the helpless and unprotected. Whoever goes to a manor there and witnesses the good-natured doting of some masters and mistresses, and the affectionate devotion of some slaves, may be tempted to fantasize about the poetic legend of the patriarchal system that is often spoken of. And all this, but over this scene loomed a terrible shadow, the shadow of the law. So long as the law regards all these persons, with their beating hearts and living sentiments, as mere objects belonging to their masters, so long as the failures, misfortunes, and if indiscretion or death might at any moment lead them to exchange a life of well-meaning protection and indulgence for hopeless pain and toil, there could be nothing good or desirable in the best regulation of slavery. Mr. Shelby is a very ordinary man with a kind heart. Tolerant of those around him, his estate was never short of anything to make a black man comfortable. However, his speculations were rampant and deep, and a large number of his notes fell into Harley's hands, and this little piece of information is the key to the preceding conversation. As it happened, Eliza overheard enough of the conversation as she approached the door to know that a merchant was proposing marriage to her master. When she came out, she wanted to stop at the door and listen, but the hostess's call forced her to leave in a hurry. She thought she heard that the businessman wanted to buy her child. Could she be mistaken? Her heart was beating fast and she hugged him tightly involuntarily. The little guy raised his head and looked at her face in surprise. The hostess said, "Eliza, girl, what happened to you today? At this time?" Eliza knocked over the wash basin, knocked over the worktop, and finally abstractly offered her mistress a nightgown in place of the silk dress she had ordered her to take from the closet. Eliza was stunned. She raised her eyes and said, "Oh, miss." Then she burst into tears. Sitting in a chair started sobbing. "What's the matter, Eliza, what's the matter with you?" said the hostess. "Oh, miss," said Eliza, "there was a merchant talking to the master in the drawing room and I heard." "Well, silly boy, if so." "Oh, miss, what do you think? Will the owner sell my Harry?" The poor girl threw herself on the chair, convulsed and sobbed. "Sell him out, you silly girl. You know your master never dealt with those southern merchants, and never intended to sell any of his servants, so long as they behaved themselves. Why, you silly boy. Who do you think would want to buy your Harry? Do you think everyone in the world is as attracted to him as you are, you silly boy? Come on, be happy and hook up my skirt. Come, cheer up, and hook me dress, okay? Comb my hair into that beautiful braid you learned that day and stop eavesdropping at the door." "But, miss, you will never agree." "Nonsense, kid. Of course, I shouldn't." "Why do you say that?" I would rather my children be sold, but seriously. Eliza, you think too highly of that little guy. Mrs. Shelby was an outstanding woman both intellectually and morally. In addition to that natural magnanimity and broad-mindedness which are often said to be peculiar to Kentucky women, she was endowed with high moral and religious sentiments and principles, and put it into practice with great energy and ability. Her husband did not profess any particular religious belief, but reverenced and respected her consistency and perhaps a little awe of her opinions. What is certain is that in her search for comfort, he gave her infinite space in all the good works done by her servants in teaching and improving them, though he himself never took part in them. In fact, if he did not entirely believe in the doctrine of the efficiency of the saints' extra benevolence, he seemed to do so to some extent. His wife's piety and kindness were sufficient for two people, immersed in a vague expectation of reaching heaven through her extraordinary qualities of which he had no particular pride in himself. After talking to the businessmen, the heaviest burden on his mind was the necessity of explaining to his wife the arrangements he had in mind, in response to the entreaties and objections he knew he had reason to meet. Mrs. Shelby had no idea of her husband's predicament, except that he generally had a good temper. She was utterly incredulous at Eliza's suspicions. In fact, she paid no attention to the matter at all. She was busy preparing for the evening visit, and the matter had completely disappeared from her mind. Chapter 2. Mother. Eliza has been pampered by her mistress since she was a child. Those who have traveled through the South must have often noticed the peculiar elegance, softness of voice, and manners of the Quatrin and mulatto women, which in many cases seems to have been their special gift. These natural beauties of the Quadlon people are often combined with the most dazzling beauty, and in almost every case, a personal appearance that is thrilling and pleasing to the eye. The Eliza we describe is not a fancy sketch, but a memory of when we met her in Kentucky many years ago. Under the care of her mistress, Eliza grew up safely. There is no temptation, and beauty is fatal to a slave. She married an intelligent and talented young mulatto named George Harris, a slave on a nearby estate. The young man was hired by his owner to work in a bagging factory. His intelligence makes him considered the #1 guy here. He invented a machine for cleaning hemp, which, given its inventor's education and circumstances, showed as much mechanical genius as Whitney's cotton press. 2. A young black man in Kentucky invented this machine. Mrs. Stowe's note. He was handsome, well-mannered, and the favorite of the factory. However, in the eyes of the law, this young man is not a person, but a thing. All these superior conditions are subject to a vulgar, narrow-minded, domineering master. The gentleman had heard of the reputation of George's invention and rode to the factory to see what this clever chattel was all about. His employer received him warmly and congratulated him on having such a valuable slave. George was in high spirits, spoke fluently, and had a tall and straight posture. Looking handsome, his master began to feel an uneasy feeling of inferiority. What qualifications did his slave have to walk about the country, inventing machines, and holding his head among the gentlemen? He would put a stop to this soon. Let's see if he can still be so smart. Therefore, the manufacturer and everyone involved were stunned when he suddenly asked for George's salary and announced that he would take him home. But, Mr. Harris, the manufacturer reminded, isn't this too sudden? What if it is? Isn't that person mine? Sir, we are willing to increase the compensation standard. No problem at all, sir. I don't need to rent my hands unless I want to. But, sir, He seems to be peculiarly suited for it. I dare say he may be, I'm sure of it. He never quite took to anything I asked him to do. But just think that he invented this machine, one of the workers unfortunately interjected. Oh, that's right. Is it a labor-saving machine? I'm sure he invented it. Let the Negroes invent it themselves. Any time is fine. They are labor-saving machines in their own right, every one of them. No, he should go wandering. When George heard his doom suddenly announced by a force he knew to be irresistible, he stood dumbly like a man. He clasped his arms and pursed his lips tightly. But the painful emotion burned in his breast and shot out streams of fire in his veins. He was breathing rapidly, and his big black eyes were flashing like live coals, but for the kind manufacturer who touched his arm and said in a low tone, "He may burst into some dangerous emotions. Get out of the way, George, and follow him for now. We will try our best to help you." The tyrant heard the whispers. Although he couldn't hear clearly what was said, he guessing the meaning, he strengthened his determination in his heart to maintain control over the victim. George was taken home and did the most menial work on the farm. He had been able to stifle every disrespectful word, but that twinkling eye, the dark and restless brow, was part of the irrepressible natural language, an indisputable sign. It shows too clearly that this man cannot be won. It was during this happy time while working in the factory that George met and married his wife. During this period, because he was deeply trusted and favored by his employer, he could enter and leave the factory freely. The marriage was highly approved of by Mrs. Shelby. Mrs. Shelby was very pleased with the marriage, and she thought it a pleasure to unite her handsome darling with a man of his age who was in every way suitable for her, and they were married in the great parlor of the mistress. The hostess personally decorated the bride's beautiful hair with orange flowers and put a bridal veil on her. Of course, this veil could not be worn on a fairer head. White gloves, cakes and fine wine and guests praising the beauty of the bride are indispensable. Doting and generous compliments to the hostess are indispensable. For a year or two, Eliza met her husband frequently. Except for the loss of 2 infant children, nothing could interrupt their happy life. She was full of attachment to these 2 children. She was so distraught with grief for her 2 children that she required the gentle persuasion of a mistress who, with maternal anxiety, sought to channel her naturally passionate emotions within the bounds of reason and religion. However, after little Harry was born, she gradually became calmer and more stable. Every bleeding tie and throbbing nerve seemed whole and healthy as it became entwined again with the little being, and Eliza was a happy woman until her husband was roughly removed from his kind employer, taken away, and placed under the iron hooves of his rightful master. The manufacturer kept his promise, and a week or 2 after George was taken away he called on Mr. Harris, who he hoped the heat of the moment had passed, and tried every means to induce Mr. Harris to put George back into his old business. "You don't have to waste any more words," he said stubbornly. "I know my own business." "Gentlemen, I don't want to interfere, sir. I just thought you might think it would be to your advantage to leave your people to us on the terms proposed." "Oh, I understand this very well. The day I took him out of the factory, I saw you blinking and whispering, but you can't do this to me. This is a free country, sir. This man is mine, and I can do with him what I will, that's all." George's last hope was shattered. In front of him was only a life of hard work. And every infuriating insult that despotic ingenuity could devise made his life more miserable. A very humane jurist once said, "The worst use you can make of a man is to hang him." No, there is a worse use. Chapter 3 Husband and Father. Mrs. Shelby had already left. Eliza was standing on the balcony, looking dejectedly at the passing carriage, when a hand was placed on her shoulder. She turned around with a bright smile in her bright eyes. "George, is that you? You scared me to death." "I'm so glad you're here. Miss, you've had your lunch break. Come to my little room so we can be alone." So saying, she led him into a neat little room on the balcony, where, at the summons of the mistress, she usually sat and did her needlework. "I'm so happy. Why don't you laugh? Look at Harry, how big he has grown." The little boy stood timidly, clutching the hem of his mother's skirt and looking at his father through his curly hair. "Isn't he beautiful?" said Eliza, taking up his long curly hair, and kissed him. "I wish he had never been born." George said bitterly, "I wish I had never been born." Eliza was so startled and frightened that she sat down and laid her head on her husband's shoulder, tears streaming down her face. "Well, Eliza, I really shouldn't have made you so sad, poor girl." "It's too bad," he said fondly. "I wish you had never met me. You could have been so happy." George. How can you talk like that? What terrible thing has happened or is going to happen? "I believe we have been happy until recently, yes, dear," said George. Then he pulled the child onto his knees, looked carefully into his piercing dark eyes, and ran his hands through his long curls. "Just like you, Eliza, you are the handsomest woman I have ever seen, and the best I could ever hope to see, but, oh, I wish I had never seen you." "I have never seen you or me." "Oh, George, how could you do this?" "Yes, Eliza, it's all suffering, suffering, suffering. My life is miserable, my life is burning. I am a poor, miserable, lonely drudge. I can only drag you down, that's all. We work hard to do everything. What's the use of trying to understand anything, trying to be anything? What's the use of living? I wish I was dead." "Oh, dear George, what a bad thing you are doing. I know how you feel about losing your factory job and having a high-maintenance master, but please be patient, maybe." "Patience." He interrupted her and said, "Don't I have patience? Did I say a word when he took me away from a place where everyone was nice to me for no reason? I literally paid him all my earnings and they all said I did a great job. Well, that's scary." "But he is your master, you know," said Eliza. "My master? Who made him my master?" "That's what I was thinking. What right did he have over me? I am human just like him. I'm better than him. I know business better than him. I am better at management than him. I can read better than him. I can write better than him. This is all learned by myself, not by him, but by myself. Now what right does he have to turn me into a cart horse?" "Horse?" "He wanted to do this. He said he wanted to degrade me and make me humble, but he deliberately made me do the hardest, most tiring, and most difficult job. The dirtiest job. Oh, George. George. You scared me. I've never heard you say that, and I'm worried you're going to do something terrible. I'm not surprised at all how you feel, but for me and for Harry, you must be careful, you must be careful. I have always been careful and patient. But things were getting worse. Flesh and blood could stand it no longer. He took every opportunity to insult me and torment me. I thought I could work hard, keep quiet, and read and learn something after work. But the more he saw that I could do it, the more he wanted me to do it. He said even though I didn't say anything. But he sees that there is a devil in me, and he wants to bring it out. One day, it will burst out in a way that he doesn't like, or maybe I'm wrong. Dear, what should we do? Eliza said sadly. Just yesterday, said George, I was loading rocks into the car. Young Tom stood and swung his whip so close to the horse that it frightened him. I tried my best to please him to stop, but he still didn't move. I begged him again and he turned around and started hitting me. I held his hand and he screamed and kicked and ran to his father. Tell him I'm fighting him. He came angrily and said he wanted to teach me who was my master. He tied me to a tree, cut the switch for the little master, and told him that he could whip me until he was tired. He really did it. If one day I don't let him remember this. The young man's brow darkened, and his eyes burned with an expression that made his young wife shudder. Who made this man my master? That's what I want to know. He said. Okay. I have always thought that I must obey my master and mistress or I could not be a Christian, said Eliza sadly. Raise you up, feed you, clothe you, pamper you, teach you. To get you a good education, that's some of the reasons they ask you for. But I've been kicked, handcuffed, scolded, and at best I've been left alone. What do I owe? I have paid hundreds of times for what I have done. I won't stand it. No, I won't, said he, clasping his hands tightly, and frowning. Eliza trembled and remained silent. She had never seen her husband in such a mood. Her gentle moral system seemed like a trance in such a passion. It's as bent as a reed. You know the poor little Carlo you gave me. He was my only comfort, George added. It sleeps with me at night and follows me during the day, looking at me as if it understands how I feel. One day, I was feeding it some scraps I picked up at the kitchen door. Mazer came over and said that I was feeding it with his money. He could not let every nigger have his dog, and ordered me to tie a stone around its neck and throw it into the pond. Oh, George, you didn't do it. I won't do it. But he did it anyway. Moss and Tom stoned the poor drowning man. Poor guy. He looked at me sadly, as if wondering why I didn't save him. I had to be whipped because I would not save him myself. I don't care. Mars will find that I am a man that cannot be tamed by a whip. If he's not careful, my end is coming. What are you going to do? Oh, George. Don't do anything bad. As long as you trust God and try to do the right thing, He will save you. I'm not a Christian like you, Eliza. My heart is full of bitterness. I can't believe God. Why did He let things turn out like this? Oh, George, we must have faith, the hostess said. When we encounter anything that goes against our will, we must believe that God is the best choice. This is easy to say to people sitting on the sofa or riding in the carriage, but if they stand on in my position, I think it would be harder for them to accept it. I hope I can be a good person. But my heart is burning and I can't calm down no matter what. If I told you everything I'm going to say, you can't now either. You don't know it all yet. What can come now? Well, recently Master has been saying that he was a fool to let me marry out of here. He hated Mr. Shelby and all his people because they were so proud and held their heads higher than he was, and I got the idea of pride from you. He said he would never let me come here again. I want to marry a wife and settle down in his place. At first, he only murmured these words, but yesterday he told me that I should marry Mina and settle down with her in a cabin, or else he would sell me to the river. Eliza said simply, "Why, but you married me, the minister." It's like you married a white guy, said Eliza. Don't you know that slaves cannot marry? There is no law in this country. I cannot have you as my wife if he wants to separate us. That's why I wish I'd never met you. Why do I wish I had never been born? It would be better for both of us, and better for the poor child, if he had never been born. All this could happen to him. Oh, the master is so kind. Yes, but who knows, he might die. Then I don't know who it will be sold to. He is handsome and smart, so what is there to be happy about? I tell you, Eliza, every good and pleasant thing about your child will pierce your soul. It will make you think him too valuable for you to keep. This sentence deeply hurt Eliza's heart. The figure of the businessman appeared in front of her eyes, as if someone had given her a fatal blow. Her face was pale and she was breathing heavily. She looked nervously at the balcony, where the boy, tired of the serious conversation, had retreated. He was riding up and down triumphantly on Mr. Shelby's crutch. She wanted to tell her husband about her concerns, but held back. No, he's had enough, poor guy, she thought. No, I won't tell him, and it's not true. The lady never deceives us. Well, Eliza, my daughter, the husband said sadly, now, bear with me, goodbye, I'm leaving. Going away, George. Where to go? Go to Canada. He straightened up and said, I will buy you when we get there. This is our only hope. You have a kind master, and he will not fail to sell you. I'll buy you and the kid, God willing, I will. Oh, terrible. What if you were captured? I will not be taken away, Eliza, I will die first. Give me freedom or give me death. You won't commit suicide. There is no need for this. They'll kill me, fast enough. They'll never let me go down the river alive. Oh, George, for my sake, you must be careful. Don't do anything bad, don't touch yourself or anyone else. You are tempted too much, too much. But don't you must go, but go cautiously and ask God to help you. Well, Eliza, listen to my plan. Moss wants me to come by here with a note to Mr. Simon, who lives a mile away. I believe he wants me to come here and tell you my news if he thinks it will make any difference. What he called Shelby folks had even sadder words. Then he will be happy. I went home reluctantly, like it was all over. I've made some preparations, and there are people who will help me. In a week or so, I will be one of the missing. Pray for me, Eliza, maybe God will hear your prayers. Oh, pray, George, and trust him, and you won't do anything bad. Well, now, goodbye, George said calmly, holding Eliza's hand and looking into her eyes. They stood in silence, then the last words. With sobs and wails as partings might be made by those who hope for a cobweb-like reunion, husband and wife parted. Chapter 4 Uncle Tom's Cabin. Night. Uncle Tom's cabin is a small wooden building, next to the house. This is the favorite name of the Negroes for his master's residence. There is a neat garden in front of the house, where strawberries, raspberries, and a variety of fruits and vegetables thrive every summer under careful tending. The entire front of the courtyard is covered with a large patch of scarlet hibiscus and native multiflora roses. They are so intertwined that there is almost no trace of the rough logs. In summer, various gorgeous annual plants such as marigolds, petunias, and green perennials also find a comfortable corner here, showing off their splendor and becoming the joy and pride of Aunt Chloe's heart. Let's go into her home. The dinner at home was over, and Aunt Chloe, who was the head chef in charge of preparing the dinner, handed over the cleaning and washing dishes to the inferior people in the kitchen, and went to her own little world to prepare for her old friend dinner, so don't doubt it. It's her you see by the stove, presiding with gusto over some stir-fry in the stew pot, and then thoughtfully lifting the lid of the roasting kettle, from which emerges the unmistakable smell of the good stuff. Her face is round and black and shiny. It was so smooth that you thought she might have egg-washed it, just like her own teacup. Her plump face beamed with satisfaction and contentment, and she wore a carefully sewn plaid headscarf, though, if we must admit. Her face was also tinged with the self-awareness that made Aunt Chloe known to her neighbors as her #1 cooking talent. She is certainly a cook, at heart and soul. Seeing her approaching, the chickens, ducks and turkeys in the barnyard all looked solemn. She seemed to be contemplating her fate, and it was certain that she was always brooding over stuffing, and roasting to a degree that would terrify any thinking poultry. She makes corn tortillas, including hoe tortillas, dumpling tortillas, waffles, and countless other varieties. A sublime mystery to all less skilled cooks, and she would rock with genuine pride and glee as she told of the futile efforts of one after another of her companions to reach her fat body. A visitor came to the house. The presentable arrangement of dinner awakened all the energy of her soul. No sight was more welcome to her than a pile of suitcases on the balcony, for she foresaw new endeavors and new triumphs. But now that Aunt Chloe is looking at the roasting pan, well, let her do the cooking first. Let's wait until we finish drawing this picture of the cabin. There was a bed in the corner of the room, neatly covered with snow-white sheets. A rather large rug lay beside the bed. Aunt Chloe holds her own on this rug because she's clearly upper class, actually. The rug and bed, and the whole corner, were given special treatment, and made as sacred as possible, safe from the intrusions and profanations of the little ones. In fact, that corner is the institution's studio. In another corner, there is a simpler bed, clearly designed for use. On the wall above the fireplace hang several very fine scripture engravings, and a portrait of General Washington, drawn and colored in a manner that would have astonished the hero, had he happened to see anything like it. On a rough bench in the corner, several boys with shaggy heads, twinkling dark eyes and chubby cheeks were busy instructing babies on their first walks, which usually involved standing. Get up, balance for a moment, then fall down again. Every failure is met with cheers because it's such a smart thing to do. There was a table placed in front of the stove. The limbs of the table were somewhat rheumatoid. It was covered with a piece of cloth. There were cups and plates with colorful patterns on it, as well as other things for the meal. On this table sat Uncle Tom, Mr. Shelby's best assistant, and as he is the hero of our story, we must have him photographed for our readers. He is tall, broad-chested, muscular, and has dark and shiny skin. The African features on the face are serious, steady, rational, and affable. His whole person exuded a sense of self-respect and majesty, but also frankness and humility. At this moment, he was staring attentively at a stone slab in front of him, carefully and slowly copying several letters on it. His move was ignored by Moss R. George, a bright and intelligent 13-year-old boy who seemed fully aware of his dignity as a teacher. "Not that way, Uncle Tom, not that way," he said briskly. Uncle Tom struggled to hold the end of his G to the wrong side. "That makes it a Q, you see," said Uncle Tom. "For God's sake, eh?" Uncle Tom said with reverence and with an expression of admiration. He watched his young teacher scribbling countless Q's and G's with great interest. To inspire his thinking, then, he picked up the pen with his big, heavy fingers and patiently started again. How easy it is for white people to do things. Aunt Chloe said proudly while holding bacon crumbs with a fork and greasing the iron plate, looking at Master George proudly. He can write now. I can also read. You can come here to give us lessons in the evening, it's so fun. But, Aunt Chloe, I'm starving to death. George said. Isn't the cake in the pan almost cooked? Okay, Mr. George. Aunt Chloe opened the lid and said, the brown is beautiful. Such a lovely brown color. Ah, let me do it myself. A few days ago, the lady asked Sally to try making cakes. Smaller than my shoes, let's go. In the end, Aunt Chloe expressed her disdain for Sally's greenness, and then opened the oven lid, revealing a neatly baked pound cake. No pastry chef in the city would be impressed by this cake. Ashamed. This was evidently the centerpiece of the entertainment, and Aunt Chloe now set about preparing dinner. Here you go, Moss and Pete. Get out of the way, you niggas. Go away, Polly, dear, Mother will give her kid some money. Now, Mr. George. Just take down the book and sit down with my dad, and I'll be grilling sausages and I'll have the first batch of cake on your plate in no time. They want me to come to the house for supper, said George, but I know what to do, Aunt Chloe. That's it, my dear. Aunt Chloe said, piling the steaming pancakes on his plate. You know your old aunt will save the best for you. Then she happily turned around to bake her pancakes. Mr. George said, now let's make the cake. At this time, the activities in the spoon department calmed down a little. God bless you, Mr. George. Aunt Chloe grabbed his arm and said earnestly, you're not going to cut it with a knife that heavy. Smash everything and throw away all the pretty stuff. I have a thin old knife that's super sharp. Now, look, it's like a feather just as light, eat it now, you won't have anything to beat it. Said Tom Lincoln. George pouted and said, their Ginny cooks better than you. Aunt Chloe said contemptuously, I mean, compared with our people, they are nothing. They are simple, amiable people, but they have no idea at all when it comes to dressing up in style. Nice guy to put Mr. Lincoln and Mr. Shelby together. And Miss Lincoln, can she sweep it into the room like my lady? Oh, come on, don't tell me anything about the Lincolns. Aunt Chloe shook her head, looking like she wished she knew something about the world. But I heard you say, George said, Ginny's a pretty good cook. That's what I said, said Aunt Chloe. Okay, ordinary cooking, Ginny can do it, make a good bread, keep her potatoes away, her tortillas are not extra, now they are not extra. Ginny's tortillas weren't extra, but they were far away, but, lor, what could she do when she got to higher ground? She could make pies, but what kind of pie would she make? Can she make a real cream pie that melts in your mouth and is as soft as a puff? I went there when Miss Mary was getting married. Ginny showed me the wedding pies she made. Ginny and I were good friends. You know I didn't say anything. You go, Mr. George. If I had a batch of these pie I couldn't sleep for a week, why? They don't care at all. George said, I think Ginny thinks they will always be so good. Isn't that what she thinks? There she was, showing them, like she was innocent. You see, right here, Ginny didn't know. Lor, this family is nothing. Can't let her know. It's not her fault. Ah, Mr. George, you have no idea of the privilege you have in your family and your upbringing." At this point, Aunt Chloe sighed and rolled her eyes emotionally. "Aunt Chloe, I know I have the privilege of pie and pudding," George said. "Ask Tom Lincoln, ask Tom Lincoln. I cry for him every time I see him." Aunt Chloe sat on the chair, listening to little Mars's wise words, laughing loudly, laughing tears rolled down her shiny black cheeks. From time to time, he playfully slapped George Moss in the face, poked him, told him to go away, said he was a madman, said he was suitable to kill her, and said he would kill her one day. In between each fierce prophecy, George would laugh, each time the laughter became longer and more violent. Until George really starts to feel like he's a very dangerously witty guy who should be careful about how he talks and make it as funny as possible. "That's what you told Tom, right?" "Oh, God. What will young people do? Do you cry for Tom?" "Oh, God, Mr. George. Don't make the hornworm laugh." "Yeah," George said, "I said to him, Tom, you should go see Aunt Chloe's pie, that's the real thing." Aunt Chloe said, "It's a pity that Tom can't do it." Tom's misfortune seemed to have left a deep impression on her. "Mr. George, you should have him over here for supper," she added. "You'd look beautiful doing that. You know, Mr. George, you should feel that your privileges are more important than anyone else's, because all our privileges are it is given to us by others. We should always remember this." Aunt Chloe said seriously. George said, "Okay, I'm going to invite Tom over next week." George said, "Aunt Chloe, you have to dress up nicely, we're going to make eyes widened. We're going to make him eat so much that he won't forget it for 2 weeks." "Yes, yes, Martin," said Aunt Chloe cheerfully. "You'll see. Oh my God. Think of some of our dinners. Do you remember when we had General Knox to dine? I made that big chicken pie. The lady and I almost had a fight over that piece of pie crust. I don't know what ladies think sometimes, but sometimes, when a person has the heaviest of responsibilities, as you say, they become more serious, and they spend more time to hang around, more time to interfere with others. Now, miss. She wanted me to do this, she wanted me to do that, and finally, becoming more polite, I said, now, miss, look at your beautiful white hands, with their long fingers and shining rings, like my white lilies. The flowers are stained with dew, look at my big black hands again. Don't you think God must have wanted me to make pie crust while you stayed in the living room? DL, I'm just saying, Mr. George. What did Mom say? George said. She said, well, Aunt Chloe, I guess you're right, and she went into the living room. She should hit me on the head. Because I'm so rude, but that's my problem, I can't argue with the ladies in the kitchen. George said, I remember everyone said that. Isn't it? Was I behind the restaurant door that day? Did I see the general pick up his plate 3 times, wanting more of that pie? Roll, I wanted to split myself. And Genera, he knows what cooking is, Aunt Chloe said, cheering up. Genalal is a good man. He comes from a very wealthy family in Old Virginia. He knows as much as I do what a Genalal is. You see, Mr. George, all pies have pints in them, but not everyone knows what they are, or rather what they are. But Gened knew it, and I knew it from the marks he made. Master George had reached a state that even a boy could reach, under unusual circumstances, when he could not eat any other food, so that he had the leisure to notice the pile of furry heads and sparkling eyes in the opposite corner. They were watching their actions hungrily. Here you go, Moss, Pete, he said, breaking off some free pieces and throwing them to them. "You want some, don't you? Come, Aunt Chloe, bake them some cake." George and Tom moved to a comfortable seat in the chimney corner. After Aunt Chloe baked a lot of cakes, she held her child on her lap and began to stuff things into the child's and her own mouths alternately, and then shared them with Moss and Pete. They seemed more interested. "Likes to eat his own food and roll on the floor under the table while he eats. Tickle each other and pull the children's toes from time to time." The mother said, "Oh, please stop making trouble, okay?" When the children's actions became too stubborn, she would kick them under the table. "Now that the white people are here, can't you be more presentable? Stop making trouble, okay? You'd better mind yourselves. Otherwise, when Mr. George leaves, I will make your buttons smaller." What exactly this terrible menace meant, it is difficult to say, but what is certain is that its terrible ambiguity seemed to have made no impression on the young sinner. "La, now," said Uncle Tom. They were tickling all the time and were disobedient. At this moment, the boys emerged from under the table, their hands and faces covered with syrup, and began to kiss the babies vigorously. "You guys go away quickly," Mom said, pushing their furry heads away. "If you do this, you will be united. It never gets dirty. Go and wash yourself at the spring." As she said that, she slapped her hard again. The slap was loud, but it seemed to only make the little guys laugh harder. They pushed each other and stumbled out of the door, happily outside the door. Cried. Aunt Chloe said proudly, "Have you ever seen such an angry child?" As she said this, she took out an old towel prepared for such emergencies and poured a little water on it from the broken teapot. Began to wipe the molasses off the child's face and hands until the child was shiny. He put her on Tom's lap while he was busy putting away dinner. The baby spent this time tugging at Tom's nose, scratching his face, and burying her chubby hands in his furry hair, the last of which seemed to give her special satisfaction. Tom said, "She is such a pretty little girl." They chased her and roared like bears until, Aunt Chloe said, their voices could have knocked her head off. According to her own account, such surgical operations occurred every day in the cabin, so her announcement did nothing to dampen the joy until everyone roared. After rolling and dancing, he regained his composure. "Well, I hope you're done," said Aunt Chloe, who was. "We wanted to sit and have meetings. It was so much fun. We like to have meetings." "Pull, Aunt Chloe, push it down and let them sit on it," said Mr. George decisively, pushing the rude machine. Aunt Chloe seemed to be very happy to save face and push the thing down. Pushing and saying, "Well, maybe it will be good for them." Now, the House decided to form a committee of the whole to consider the issue of accommodation and arrangements for the meeting. Aunt Chloe said, "How should we cheer now? I don't know." At the weekly meeting at Uncle Tom's house. "I don't know how long it has been since there were no cheers. This seems to give us some encouragement, and we hope we can find a way now," suggested Moss. "Old Uncle Peter took both legs off the oldest cheer last week. Go ahead." Aunt Chloe said, "I'll help you pull them out, some of your sparkly stuff." Moss said, "Well, as long as it stays stuck in the wall, it'll hold. Uncle Pete can't sit down because he snores when he sings. One night he almost went on a rampage," Pete said. "Good guy." "Then get him in," Moss said, "and he'll start saying, 'Come on, saints and sinners, listen to me,' and then he'll fall down," Moss accurately imitating the old man's twang. rolling on the floor to illustrate the supposed disaster. Aunt Chloe said, "Come on, be serious, okay? Don't you feel ashamed?" Mr. George, however, laughed too, and declared that Moss was a bad guy. So the mother's warning seemed to have had no effect. "Well, old man," said Aunt Chloe, "you have to move them in." Moss said to Peter from the side, "Mother's bar is like the widow's bar that Mr. George read about in a good book. It never fails." "I'm pretty sure one of them collapsed last week," Pete said, bringing them all down while singing. "That machine is broken, isn't it?" While Moss and Pete were chatting, 2 empty barrels were moved into the cabin. In order to prevent rolling, a stone was placed on each side, and the wooden boards were placed horizontally on top. This arrangement, plus the overturning of some pots and buckets, and get rid of the rickety chairs. Finally the preparations were completed. "Mr. George reads so beautifully, I know he will stay and read to us," Aunt Chloe said. "It will be more fun this way." George agreed readily. "Because your child is always ready for anything that makes him important." The room was soon filled with all kinds of people, including an 80-year-old white-haired patriarch, as well as 15-year-old girls and young men. Innocuous gossip was exchanged on various subjects, such as where Aunt Sally got her new red kerchief, and the spotted gauze gown Miss Lissy was going to give her while she sewed the new one. "All right." And Mr. Shelby's intention of buying a new Scottish pony to grace the place. Several believers, who belonged to nearby families, received permission to come to the meeting and brought with them a selection of information, words, and deeds about the house and the place. This information circulated as freely as the upper-class gossip. After a while, the singing started, and everyone present was obviously very happy. Not even the shortcomings of a nasal voice can prevent these naturally gifted voices from singing songs that are both wild and impassioned. Sometimes the lyrics were commonplace hymns known to be sung in nearby churches, and sometimes they were wilder, less explicit lyrics heard at camp gatherings. The chorus of one of the songs is as follows, sung very energetically and contagiously: "Death on the battlefield, death on the battlefield. The glory deep in my soul." Another sentence that is often repeated by another person I particularly like is dash. "Oh, I want to go to glory, won't you go with me? Don't you see the angel calling me to leave? Don't you see the golden city and the eternal day?" Some people clapped their hands, and some shook hands with each other happily, as if they had reached the other side of the river. Various words of advice or experience followed one after another, intertwined with the singing. A grizzled old woman long gone from the workforce but revered as a chronicler of the past. She stood up, leaning on her cane, and said, "Okay, kids. I'm so happy to hear your voices and see you again, because I don't know when I'm going to be great, but I'm ready, children. I seem to have tied up my little bundle and put on my hat. Just waiting for the stage coach to pick me up home. Sometimes, at night, I seem to hear the creaking of the wheels, and I keep looking out. Now, you must also be prepared, because I tell you, children," she said, banging her stick on the floor, "glory is a great thing. This is a great thing, child, you know nothing about it. It is incredible." The old woman sat down in tears, as if completely overcome, while the whole circle shouted, "South, the bright Canaan, I want to go to the land of Canaan." Mr. George was invited to read the last chapters of the Book of Revelation, frequently interrupted by exclamations such as "Sake snow." Just listen to this. Think about it. Is this really coming? George is a smart boy. His mother gave him a good religious education, and he found that he became the object of universal admiration, so he expressed his opinions from time to time. His serious attitude was commendable, and he was admired by young people. Blessings from the elderly, everyone agrees. A preacher couldn't have preached better than he did. He was so amazing. Uncle Tom was the doyen of religious affairs in the neighborhood. Naturally, his organizational morale predominated, and his mind was broader and more cultivated than that of his companions, so. As a minister among them he was held in great esteem. His style of exhortation was simple, earnest, and sincere, and inspired even the better educated. But he was particularly outstanding in prayer. His prayers were full of touching simplicity and childlike earnestness. Expressed in the language of the Bible, it seemed to be completely integrated into his life, became a part of himself, and flowed unconsciously from his mouth. In the words of a pious old black man, he prays directly. His prayers always inspired piety in his listeners. So much so that there is often a danger that his prayers will be lost entirely in the multitude of responses that burst out around him. Just as this scene was happening in the cabin, another scene happened in the owner's hall. The merchant and Mr. Shelby were sitting together in the aforesaid dining room. The dining table is covered with papers and writing utensils. Mr. Shelby was busy counting bundles of banknotes. After counting, he pushed the banknotes to the merchant, who also counted the banknotes. "Very good," said the businessman, "sign your name now." Mr. Shelby handed him the bond, signed it hastily, like a man who has done something unpleasant in a hurry, and pushed it over with the money. Haley took out a piece of parchment from an old leather bag. After looking at it for a while, he handed it to Mr. Shelby, who took it with suppressed eagerness. "Well, now, it's done," the businessman stood up and said. "It's done," said Mr. Shelby in a thoughtful tone, and he drew a long breath. "Repeat it again, it's done." "It seems to me that you are not very satisfied," said the merchant. "Haley," said Mr. Shelby, "I hope you will remember that you promised me on your honor not to sell Tom without knowing into whose hands he would fall." Said the businessman, "Sir, you have just done it." Shelby said arrogantly, "You know the situation very well, and I am obligated." "Well, you know, they probably will too." "Humiliate me," said the merchant. "Anyway, I'll do my best to find Tom a good berth. As for me being bad to him, you don't have to worry. If I have anything to thank God for, it's that I've never been cruel." Mr. Shelby, having listened to the businessman's previous exposition of his principles of humanity, was not particularly reassured by these statements. But as these declarations were the best consolation that the situation allowed, he left the merchant in silence, and smoked his cigar alone. Chapter V shows how Life Properties feels about changing owners. Mr. and Mrs. Shelby have gone back to their apartment for the night. She stood in front of the mirror. Brushing through Eliza's intricate braids and curls, noting her pale cheeks and haggard eyes, she declined her ministrations that night and ordered her to bed. Naturally, the job reminded her of her morning conversation with the girl. She turned around, said nonchalantly to her husband, "By the way, Arthur, who was that dirty guy you dragged to our table today?" "Haley is his name," Shelby said, looking rather uneasily. He turned around in his chair and continued to stare at the letter. Haley asked who he was. "What's the matter here?" Mr. Shelby said, "The last time I was in Natchez, I did some business with him. Then he made it his home. Call here to dine here." Shelby said, "Why, I invited him here, and I have some accounts with him." Is he a black businessman? Said Mrs. Shelby, noticing that her husband was acting awkwardly. What's the matter, honey, why do you have such thoughts? Shelby raised his head and said, It's nothing, it's just that Eliza came over worried after dinner, crying and fussing. Say you were talking to a businessman and she heard he wanted to buy her baby, that ridiculous little goose. That's what she said, huh? Said Mr. Shelby, returning to his newspaper, and for a moment he seemed to look at it with great concentration. Not even noticing that he was holding the paper with the bottom facing up. It must come out, he said to himself, now as before. I told Eliza, said Mrs. Shelby, continuing to comb her hair, that she is such a little fool. You've never dealt with that kind of person. Of course, I know you never wanted to sell our people, especially to people like this. Well, Emily, said her husband, that's what I've always thought and said, but the truth is, my business had reached the point where I couldn't continue without it. I have to sell some of my hands. To that monster? No way, Mr. Shelby, are you serious? I'm sorry, said Mr. Shelby. I'm sorry to tell you that I am. Said Mr. Shelby. I agreed to sell Tom. What? Our Tom, that good, faithful boy, has been your faithful servant since childhood. Oh, Mr. Shelby. You also promised to give him his freedom, and I have told him. I can believe anything now. I can believe now that you would sell little Harry, poor Eliza's only child. Mrs. Shelby said in a tone of grief and anger. Well, since you must know everything, so be it. I have agreed to sell both Tom and Harry. I don't know why I get called a monster for doing what everyone does every day. Mrs. Shelby said, but why choose these? Why sell them if you must sell them? Because they bring the highest profit, that's why. I can pick another one if you like. The fellow asked me to pay a high price for Eliza, and you would be more interested in that, said Mr. Shelby. If satisfied. This despicable villain, said Mrs. Shelby angrily. Well, I didn't listen at the moment, out of consideration for your feelings, I won't listen, so please give me a little trust. Dear, Mrs. Shelby came back to her senses. Come and say, please forgive me. I was too hasty. But you will certainly allow me to intercede for these poor children. Tom is a noble-hearted and loyal man, if he were black. I believe, Mr. Shelby, that if he were left to do it, he would lay down his life for you. I know, I dare to say it, but what's the use of all this? Why not make a pecuniary sacrifice? I am willing to bear my share of the inconvenience. I nursed them, taught them, nursed them, knew all their cares and joys, and if for some trivial gain we should sell such a faithful, good, confiding child as poor Tom, and take away in a moment the lessons we have taught him, his love and worth, then how could I hold my head up among them? I taught them the responsibilities of the family, the responsibilities of parents and children, the responsibilities of husband and wife. How could I bear to have them openly admit that we did not care about any bond, any responsibility, any relationship, no matter how sacred, compared to money? I had talked to Eliza about her child, her responsibility as a Christian mother to him, to watch over him, to pray for him, to raise him in a Christian way, and now, if you want to save a little money, took him away and sold his soul and body to a blasphemous, an unprincipled person. What else can I say? I told her that a man's soul is worth more than all the money in the world. How could she believe me if she saw us turn around and sell her children? Mr. Shelby said, I'm sorry you think that, and so am I. I also respect your feelings, although I don't pretend to fully agree with your feelings, but I solemnly tell you now that it is useless. I can't control myself. I didn't mean to tell you about Emily, but simply put, between selling these two people and selling everything, we had no choice. Either they must go, or all must go. Haley already got a mortgage, and if I didn't settle it directly with him, everything would be taken away from him. I pieced together things here and there, borrowed them here and there, and begged. Harley took a liking to the kid. He agreed to settle the matter this way, and there was no other way. I am within his power and must do this. If you feel like selling them, would it be better to sell them all? Mrs. Shelby stood like a stricken person. Finally, she turned away and rested her face on her hands. Let out a groan. This is God's curse upon slavery, a bitter, painful, most damnable thing, a curse on the master, a curse on the slave. What a fool I am to think that I can escape from this fatal. What good can come out of sin according to our laws? It is a sin to hold slaves. I have always thought it was a sin since I was a girl, and even more so since I joined the church. But I thought I could gild it, I thought, by kindness, care and guidance. I can make my slaves better off than free. What a fool I am. Why, wife, you are becoming more and more like an abolitionist. Abolitionist. If they knew everything I know about slavery, they might talk. We don't need them to tell us that. You know, I never thought slavery was right, never wanted to own slaves. Mr. Shelby said, in this you differ from many wise and pious men. Do you remember Mr. B's sermon that Sunday? I don't want to hear a sermon like this. I never want to hear Mr. B's sermon in our church again. Perhaps there's nothing the pastors can do. They can't cure it, any more than we can but defend it. This always goes against my common sense. I guess you didn't like that sermon very much either. Well, said Shelby, I gotta say, these pastors sometimes do things bolder than us poor sinners. We worldly people must turn a blind eye to all kinds of things and get used to doing incomplete things. But we don't like it very much when women and pastors come out above board and outdo us on issues of modesty or morality, and that's true. But now, my dear, I believe you also see the necessity of things, and you also see that I have tried my best. Oh, yes, yes. I don't have any jewelry, said Mrs. Shelby, pointing hastily and abstractly to her gold watch. But can't this watch do its work? She added thoughtfully. I would sacrifice everything I had if it would at least save Eliza's baby. I'm sorry, so sorry. I'm sorry it's upset you so much, said Mr. Shelby, but it's not going to do any good. The truth is, Emily, it happened. The bond was signed and in Haley's hands. You have to be glad it wasn't worse. That man has ruined us all with his powers. Now he can go. If you knew the man as well as I did, you'd think we got away with it. Is he that hard? Why, to be precise, he is not a cruel person, but a leather person. A man who lives only for transactions and profits, a man who is cold, unhesitating, and merciless, like death and the grave. He will sell his biological mother for a good price and does not want the old lady to be harmed in any way. And this despicable fellow has the child of kind and loyal Tom and Eliza. My dear, in fact, this thing makes me very embarrassed, and I hate it when I think about it. I want to get things done and take possession of the house tomorrow morning. I'll ride out early tomorrow morning. I can't see Tom, that's a fact. You'd better drive somewhere and take Eliza away. Wait until she is out of sight. No, no, said Mrs. Shelby, I will never be an accomplice in this cruel business. I will go and see poor old Tom. May God bless him through this. No matter what, they will see that their mistress cares and loves them. As for Eliza, I shudder to think, God forgive us. What have we done to deserve such cruelty to happen to us? The Shelbys rarely doubted that anyone listened to their conversation. Connected to their room was a large closet with a door leading to the passage outside. When Mrs. Shelby turned Eliza away for the night, her hot and excited mind turned to this closet. She hid herself there, her ear pressed against the crack of the door, and heard the conversation word for word. As soon as she finished speaking, she stood up and left quietly. She was pale, trembling all over, her features were stiff, her lips were tightly closed, and she looked like a completely different person. He is no longer the weak and timid person before. She walked cautiously along the entrance, paused for a moment in front of her mistress's door, raised her hands to heaven in a hoarse voice, then turned and slipped into her room. It is a quiet and tidy apartment on the same floor as the hostess. The sun was shining brightly outside the window, and she often sat in front of the window doing needlework. In front of the window was a small box of books and various knickknacks, all Christmas gifts. In the closet and in the drawers were her simple wardrobes. In short, this was her home. Overall, it was a happy home for her. But lying on the bed was her sleeping son, with his long curly hair scattered casually on his unconscious face, his red mouth half opened, his chubby little hands reaching out to the sheets, and his whole face filled with a sunny smile. Poor child, said Eliza, they sold you. But your mother will save you. There was not a drop of tear on the pillow. In such a predicament, the heart had no tears to shed, only blood, flowing silently. She picked up a piece of paper and a pen and wrote in a hurry. Oh, Miss. Dear lady. Don't think me ungrateful, and don't make things difficult for me in any case. I heard everything you and the master said tonight. I'm going to save my child, you won't blame me. God bless you and repay your kindness. She hastily folded and arranged these things, then went to the drawer and prepared a small parcel for her child, which she tied tightly around her waist with a handkerchief. His mother had such a good memory that even in that frightened moment, she did not forget to put one or two of his favorite toys in the small package, and also specially kept a cutely painted parrot for him so that he could use it when he was young. She was teasing him when she wanted to wake him up. It was some trouble to rouse the little sleep bug, but after some effort he sat up, and was playing with his bird while his mother put on her hat and shawl. Where are you going, mother? He said as she approached the bed with his little coat and hat. His mother came up to him and looked him seriously in the eyes, and he immediately realized that something was unusual. Hush, Harry, she said, don't speak loudly, or they will hear you. A wicked man is coming to take little Harry away from his mother, and then carry him, in the dark. But Mom won't let him succeed. She'll put on a little boy's hat and a little boy's coat and run with him so the ugly man can't catch him. With these words, she tied up the child's simple clothes, buttoned them, and held him in her arms. She whispered to him not to move, then opened the door to the corridor from the room and walked out quietly. It was a sparkling, frost-covered, starry night. The mother wrapped her shawl tightly around the child, and the child quietly hugged the mother's neck in vague fear. As she approached, old Bruno, the big Newfoundland who slept at the end of the porch, stood up and let out a low growl. She called its name softly, and the animal, her old pet and playmate, immediately wagged its tail, ready to follow her, albeit in the honest dog's mind. Apparently still figuring out what such a rash midnight stroll might mean. As Eliza glided forward, he often stopped and looked playfully at her, then at the house, and then, seemingly relieved, he bounded after her again. A few minutes later, when they came to the window of Uncle Tom's cabin, Eliza stopped and tapped lightly on the glass. The prayer meeting at Uncle Tom's house continued late into the night in the order of hymns. Moreover, Uncle Tom indulged himself in singing several lengthy solos after the prayer meeting. As a result, although it was already between 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock, he and his good helper were not asleep yet. "Oh my God! What is that?" Aunt Chloe said, standing up and hastily closing the curtains. "Isn't this Lissy? Get dressed quickly, old man. And old Bruno." He was also looking around. "What's going on? I'll open the door." It was too late, but soon, the door suddenly opened, and the light of the tallow candle that Tom hastily lit fell on the fugitive's haggard face and gloomy and wild eyes. "God bless you, I see I'm scared of you, Lissy. Are you sick or something? I want to run away from Uncle Tom and Aunt Chloe. Take my child away," and the master sold him. Eliza came and told Uncle Tom that he had been sold, and that she was going to run away to save her children. Sold him? Both men raised their hands in astonishment. "Yes, sell him," said Eliza firmly. "Tonight I quietly went into the closet by the mistress' door, and I heard the master tell the lady that he had given away my Harry and you, Uncle Tom. Sold to a merchant, he rode off this morning, and the man will take the thing away today." During the speech, Tom stood standing with his hands raised and his eyes distracted, like a man in a dream. When the meaning of these words slowly and gradually dawned on him, instead of sitting down, he slumped down in his old chair and buried his head in his knees. "Merciful Lord, have mercy on us," said Aunt Chloe. "Oh, that doesn't seem true. What did he do that caused Mars to sell him? He didn't do anything, not because of this. The master doesn't want to sell it, and the young lady has always been kind. I heard her plead for us, but he told her it was no use, he was in debt to this man. This man has taken control of him, and if he doesn't pay off his debt, eventually he will have to sell the place and all the people and move away. Yes, I heard him say there was no choice between selling those two or selling everyone. That man was pushing him too hard. The master said he was very sorry. But, miss, you should really listen to what she has to say. If she wasn't a Christian and an angel, there never was. I'm a bad girl and shouldn't leave her like this, but there's nothing I can do about it. She herself said that a person's soul is more valuable than the whole world. This boy also has a soul. If I let him be taken away, who knows what would happen? It must be right, but if it is wrong, God forgive me, because I cannot help but do it." "Okay, old man," Aunt Chloe said, "why don't you leave too? Are you willing to wait to be sent to the river, where they killed black slaves with hard labor and hunger? I would rather die than go there. When you have time, come with Lizzie. You have a pass and can come and go at any time. Come on, I'm going to pack your things." Tom slowly raised his head, looked around sadly and quietly, and said, "No. No, I'm not going. Let Eliza be, it's her right. I wouldn't say no, but you heard what she said. If I must be sold, or everyone here must be sold, and everything must be sold, then let me be sold. I think I'm as good at stopping this as any of them," he added, while a sound like sobs and sighs shook his broad, rough chest convulsively. "Moss always finds me on the spot, he always can. I have never broken trust with anyone. I have never broken my promise to use the pass and will never do so again. It's better for me to go alone than to tear the place apart and sell everything. Moss won't blame you, Chloe, he will take care of you and the poor people." At this point, he turned around and looked at the rough mop bed full of small hairs. Suddenly collapsed. He leaned back in his chair and covered his face with his big hands. Heavy, hoarse, loud sobs shook the chair, and huge tears fell down between his fingers to the floor. "Sir, such tears are like those you fall into the coffin where your eldest son lies. Woman, that is such tears. Just like the tears you shed when you hear the cries of your dying child. Because, sir, he is a man and you are just another man. You feel nothing but sadness." "Now," said Eliza, standing in the doorway, "I saw my husband only this afternoon, and little did I know what was to come. They had him cornered, and he told me today that he was going to run away. If possible, you can try to send him a message. Tell him how and why I left, and tell him that I will try my best to find Canada. You must convey my love to him and tell him if I never see him again." She turned away from them and stood for a moment with her back to them, then added in a hoarse voice, "Tell him to be as obedient as possible and try to see me in the kingdom of heaven. Call Bruno in," she added. "Close the door, poor beast. He can't come with me." She said a few last words, shed a few tears, and said a few simple honorifics and blessings. Then he hugged the panicked child and left quietly. Chapter 6 Discovery. Mr. and Mrs. Shelby did not fall asleep immediately after their long discussion the night before, so they went to bed later than usual the next morning. Mrs. Shelby said, "I wonder what makes Eliza so persistent." She rang the bell several times, but to no avail. Mr. Shelby was standing in front of the dressing mirror sharpening his razor. At this moment, the door opened and a black boy came in with shaving water. "Andy," the hostess said, "go to Eliza's door and tell her I've knocked 3 times for her." "Poor child," she said to herself, sighing. Andy came back soon, his eyes widening in surprise. Miss Lissy's drawers were all open and her things were scattered everywhere. "I think she was scared away." The truth flashed before Mr. Shelby and his wife at the same moment. He exclaimed. "Then she got suspicious and she left." Mrs. Shelby said, "Thank God. I'm sure she will." "Wife, you talk like a fool." "You really do." "Yes, if she really did it. I would be so embarrassed. When Haley sees my hesitation in selling the child, he will think that I am indulging him and letting him get in the way. This touches my dignity." Mr. Shelby hurriedly left the room. For about a quarter of an hour, people were running around telling each other, opening and closing doors. Various faces appeared in different places. There was only one person who might have shed some light on the matter, but she remained completely silent, and that was Aunt Chloe, the head cook. She remained silent, with a cloud hanging over her once joyful face, and continued making her breakfast biscuits, as if unaware of the excitement around him. Soon, there were a dozen little crows building their nests on the balcony railing, each wanting to be the first to tell the strange mazer of his doom. Andy said, "He will definitely go crazy." "One Theswar," said Little Black Jack. "Yes, because he does sing," said Furry Mandy. "I heard about him at supper yesterday." "I heard about it then, because I went into the closet where the lady kept the kettle, and I heard every word." Mandy never thought about the meaning of every word she heard. Like a black cat, now she pretended to be superior and walked around with swagger, but forgot to say that although in the designated during that time, she was actually sitting in the middle of the kettle, but she was asleep the whole time. Finally, when Harley showed up strutting, bad news was being reported to him everywhere. The little ones on the balcony lived up to expectations and heard his hiss. His hiss was fluent and eager, which made the little ones so happy that they hid here and there to avoid his riding crop. "If only I had these brats," Harley muttered through gritted teeth. Andy said triumphantly, "But you haven't got it yet." As he said that, he said a series of indescribable words to the back of the unlucky businessman, which he could no longer hear at the time. "I said, Shelby. What an unusual business you have." Haley suddenly walked into the living room and said, "It looks like the girl and her baby are gone." Mr. Haley and Mrs. Shelby were present. Mr. Shelby said, "Excuse me, ma'am," Haley said, bowing slightly, his brows still lowered. "But I still have to say, as I said before, your report is excellent." "Is it true, sir?" "Sir," said Mr. Shelby, "if you want to communicate with me, just some gentlemanly etiquette must be observed. Andy, take Mr. Haley's hat and riding crop. Please sit down, sir." I regret to tell you that the young woman, because she overheard it, or had it reported to her, became so agitated that she ran away with her child during the night. Haley said, "I admit, I do expect a fair deal in this matter." "Okay, sir." Mr. Shelby turned sharply to him and said, "How do I understand what you say? If anyone questions my reputation, I have only one answer." When the businessman heard this, he suddenly became timid. He said in a slightly lower tone, "For a person who has done a fair deal, it's really hard to be fooled like that." "Mr. Haley," said Mr. Shelby, "if I didn't think you had reason to be disappointed, I shouldn't have had to endure the rudeness of your walk in on me this morning." Living room. However, since it is necessary on the surface, I will say this much. I will not allow others to insinuate that I am doing anything unfair in this matter. Furthermore, I consider it my duty to give you every assistance in horses, servants, etc., to recover your property. So, all in all, Haley. He suddenly changed from a majestic and cold tone to his usual calm and frank tone. "The best way for you is to maintain a good attitude, have some breakfast, and then we will see what to do." At this moment, Mrs. Shelby stood up and said she had an appointment that morning. She could not come to the breakfast table. Then, leaving a very respectable mulatto lady to attend to the gentleman's coffee, she left the room. "The old lady doesn't like you, a humble servant," Haley said uneasily, trying to make himself very familiar. "I am not accustomed to hear my wife spoken of so casually," said Mr. Shelby dryly. "Excuse me, of course, it's just a joke, you know," Harley said with a forced smile. "Some of the jokes are not so flattering," Shelby added. "The devilish freedom. Now that I have signed those documents, scold him." Haley murmured to himself, "He's been amazing since yesterday." The fall of any chancellor at court caused greater excitement among his colleagues than the fate of Tom. People talked about it all the time. Whether at home or in the fields, people did nothing but discuss the possible outcomes of the matter. Eliza's escape, an unprecedented event in the area, was also an important factor in the general excitement. People usually call him Black Sam. Black Sam, because he's 3 points blacker than any other son of ebony here. He explores the subject profoundly at every stage and aspect with a comprehensive vision and a rigorous focus on his own personal well-being. This would be a great meritorious deed for any white patriot in Washington. Sam said with emotion, "The wind is blowing now, that's a fact. He lifted his trousers up again and cleverly replaced the missing suspender button with a long nail. Yes. The wind's not blowing now, he repeated. Now, honey, Tom's down, and of course a nigger can get up, so why not this nigger? Tom was riding about the country, with black boots and a pass in his pocket, as majestic as Kaffee, but who was he? Hello, Sam. Mars wants you to find Bill and Jerry. Andy interrupted Sam's monologue. Go. What are you doing now, young man? Why, don't you know, I suppose, that Liz has disowned her little son? You teach your grandma. Sam Infinite said contemptuously. Knew it much earlier than you, this nigger is not so green now. Anyway, Mars wants Bill and Jerry to get ready, you and I and Haley will go see her. Sam said, very well, now is the time. What you need in times like this is Sam. He's a nigger. If I don't teach her a lesson, let's see what Sam is capable of. Ah. But, Sam, said Andy, you'd better think twice before you do that, for the lady doesn't want her to sleep in the cot, and she'll get tangled up in your wool. Hi. Sam opened his eyes and said, how do you know? I heard her say it myself on that happy morning, when I brought in Mazer's shaving water. She asked me to go and see why Lissy had not come to dress her, and when I told her she was leaving, she suddenly stood up and said, praise the Lord. Maser seemed crazy and said, wife, you talk like a fool. God, she'd wake him up. I know exactly what's going on, and I'm telling you, it's best to be on the lady's side. Black Sam heard this and scratched his woolly forehead. Although there was no profound wisdom on his forehead. But it also contains a lot of special wisdom needed by politicians of all colors and countries, commonly known as knowing which side of the bread is buttered. So he stopped, thought carefully, and put his trousers up again. This is an organized approach he often uses. Used to help him resolve his psychological confusion. He finally said, in this world of yours, there is nothing that cannot be said. Sam emphasized this like a philosopher, as if he had had extensive experience in different worlds and had drawn sensible conclusions. Sam added thoughtfully, now, if it were me, I would definitely say that Miss would run all over the world for Lissy. That's what she thinks, Andy said, but you nigger can't even see the ladder. Miss doesn't want your Mr. Haley to catch Lizzie's son, so that's it. Hi, said Sam, in an indescribable tone known only to those who have heard it among black people. I'll tell you more, said Andy, I think you'd better tack the horse, and do it suddenly, because I hear the lady is chirping behind you. So you've been standing there long enough. Andy said, I think you'd better tack the horse, and do it suddenly, because I hear the lady is chirping behind you. After hearing this, Sam began to work hard. After a while, he appeared, taking Bill and Jerry with him. Running gloriously towards the house, before they could have any thought of stopping, he flung himself deftly and carried them like a tornado to the horse post. Haley's horse was a timid little pony that neighed, jumped, and pulled hard on the reins. Ho, ho, said Sam. Scared, aren't you? His dark face shone with curiosity and mischief. I'll take care of you now, he said. There is a large beech tree here, and the ground is densely scattered with small, pointed, triangular beech fruits. Sam held a beech nut between his fingers. Approaching the foal, he stroked and patted it, seeming to be busy calming its excitement. Pretending to adjust the saddle, he deftly tucked the sharp little nut under the saddle, so that the lightest weight on the saddle stimulated the horse's nerves without leaving any visible bruise or wound. Dull. He rubbed his eyes and said with an approving smile, "I'll take care of them." At this time, Mrs. Shelby appeared on the balcony and waved to him. Sam took a closer look and, like any suitor pursuing the vacant seat of St. James or Washington, he made up his mind to visit her. "Why have you been hanging around, Sam?" "I asked Andy to tell you to hurry up." "God bless you, miss," said Sam. "The horses don't get locked up all at once. They're already locked up south. Gone to the ranch, God knows where." Sam. "How many times do I have to tell you not to say things like, 'God bless you, God knows'? This is evil." "Oh, God bless my soul. I forgot, miss, I'll never say that again." "Why, Sam, you said it again." "Did I? Oh God, I mean. I didn't say it." "You have to be careful, Sam. Just give me a breath, miss, and I'll start fair and I'll be very careful." "Well, Sam, you go with Mr. Haley, show him the way, give him a hand. Be careful. Horse, Sam, you know Jerry was a little lame last week, don't ride too fast." Mrs. Shelby's last words were spoken low and emphatically. "Just leave that kid alone." Sam rolled his eyes and said meaningfully, "God knows." "Gow. I didn't say that." As he spoke, he suddenly gasped, looking ridiculous and uneasy. The hostess couldn't help laughing. "Okay, miss, I'll keep an eye on the good horses." "Now, Andy," Sam said, returning to the beech tree, "you see, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that Gene man's kitten was in his growing up, you know, Andy. Kittens do this kind of thing." As he said that, Sam poked the side of Andy's face with his finger, which was very suggestive. "Hi," Andy said, immediately showing an expression of appreciation. "Yes, you see, Andy, the lady wants to make time for it. That is her favorite thing to eat. I'm just making a little time for her. Now, you see, get your horses out and walk around your land and into the woods. I don't think the horses will be in a hurry." Andy grinned. "Look," Sam said, "look, Andy, if something happens. Let's say Mr. Haley's horse starts to go backwards and buck, you and I just let go and help him, and we'll help him, oh, yes." Sam and Andy leaned their heads on their shoulders and burst out into deep, wild laughter. They snapped their fingers happily and raised their heels high. At this time, Haley appears on the balcony. After drinking a few cups of good coffee, his mood eased slightly. He walked out with a smile, chatting and laughing, and his mood recovered a lot. Sam and Andy grabbed some incomplete palm leaves, habitually using them as hats, and ran to the horse post. "Get ready to help Moss." Sam's palm fronds had been artfully detached from the braid. Like the brim of his hat, these blades began to separate and stand upright, giving it an air of blazing freedom and defiance, quite as much as any Chief Feggy's hat. And Andy's entire hat brim has left his body, and he deftly slaps the crown on his head, looking very happy, as if to say, "Who said I don't have a hat?" "Okay, kids," Haley said, "we need to cheer up now, we can't waste time. It's not like it at all." "Moss," Sam said, taking Haley's reins into his hands and holding his stirrups while Andy untied the other two horses. As soon as Haley touched the saddle, the docile pony jerked the ground, jumped up, knocking the owner off his feet and onto the soft, dry turf. Sam yelled wildly and struggled to hold on to the reins, but only scraped the aforementioned fiery palm frond into the horse's eye, which did nothing to soothe his confused nerves. So he knocked Sam over in an aggressive manner and snorted 2 or 3 times in contempt. He waved his heels in the air vigorously and quickly ran towards the lower end of the lawn, followed by Bill and Jerry. Andy let them go according to the contract and urged them to move quickly with various terrifying screams. What followed was chaos. Sam and Andy ran and shouted. The dogs were barking one after another. Mike, Moss, Mandy, Fanny, and all the little ones here, whether they were boys or girls, were rushing to run, clapping their hands and whining with such enthusiasm. People point their fingers. Haley's horse is a white horse, very agile and energetic. He seemed to enjoy this scene very much. His racing venue was a lawn nearly half a mile wide, sloping gently down on all sides into an endless woodland, and he seemed to enjoy watching how close his pursuers got to him. Close, then, when the pursuer was only a hand's distance from him. He would snore like a naughty beast and run away to a small alley in the woodland. From Sam's point of view, the last thing he wants to do is take away anyone from the team before the season he thinks is most suitable. And his efforts were undoubtedly the most heroic. Just as Lionheart's sword always shines in the forefront and thickest of battles, so wherever there is the least danger of a horse being caught, Sam's blade will be seen everywhere. There, he will go all out and shout, "Now! Get him! Get him!" This will make everything collapse indiscriminately in a moment. Harley ran up and down, cursing and swearing and stamping his feet. Mr. Shelby shouted in vain from the balcony. Shelby the lady alternately laughed at the window of the room. Watching all this in amazement. Finally, at about 12 o'clock, Sam rode Jerry back in triumph, with Haley's horse beside him. He was sweating profusely, but his eyes flickered and his nostrils expanded, showing that the free spirit was not yet complete. Subside. He was caught. He shouted triumphantly, "If it hadn't been for me, they might have been doomed themselves. But I caught him." "You!" Haley yelled angrily. "If it weren't for you, none of this would have happened." "God bless us, sir," Sam said in the most concerned tone. "And me." I kept racing and chasing until the sweat was dripping from my body. Okay. Haley said, "I lost nearly 3 hours with your nonsense. Now let's go and stop fooling around." "Why, Mars," Sam said in a disparaging tone. "I believe you want to kill us all, horses and all. We are getting ready to go down the mountain, and the little animals are sweating profusely. Why, Moss won't think of setting off until after dinner." Moss's the horse was bruised. You see, he was splashed with water. Jerry was also limping. "I don't think Miss will let us start using your method." "God bless you, sir, if we stop we can get up." Lissy had never been a fast walker. Mrs. Shelby heard this conversation from the balcony and found it very interesting. Now she's decided to do her part, too. She came forward, politely expressed her concern for Haley's surprise, and urged him to stay for supper, saying that the cook should bring. Haley walked to the living room with an ambiguous grace, while Sam rolled his eyes with an indescribable meaning and led the horse to the stable seriously. "Do you see him, Andy? Do you see him?" Sam said, waiting for him to reach the outside of the barn shelter and tie the horse to the post. "Oh, Lor, if we see him kicking and jumping and waving at us now, wouldn't that be the same as meeting him? Don't I hear you? Go away, old man," I said to myself. "You're going to do it now, ride, or wait until you catch him?" I said, "Andy, I think I can see him now." Sam and Andy leaned against the barn and laughed heartily. You should have seen how crazy he was when I brought the horse up. Oh my God, if he wanted to kill me, he would kill me, and I just stood there, like a reserved and humble man. LOL, I am your seed, Andy said. Sam, aren't you old hoss? Sam said, I'm a little dazzled. Did you see the star on the clothes rack? I saw her smiling. Andy said, I'm sure, I was playing and didn't see anything. Well, look. Sam scrubbed Haley's pony seriously. Andy, I need you to develop a habit of observation. This is a very important habit, Andy. I suggest you develop it now, while you are still young. Put your feet up, Andy. Look, Andy. Observation is the most important thing to a nigger. Didn't I see the direction of the wind in the morning? Can't I see what Mademoiselle wants, even though she never says it? This is observation. Andy, I think this is what you call ability. Different people have different abilities, but cultivating them is very helpful. Andy said, I think, if I hadn't helped you observe in the morning, you wouldn't have the ability. So smart. Andy, Sam said, there's no doubt you're a promising kid. I think very highly of you, Andy, and I don't think there's any shame in taking advice from you. We ought not to neglect anybody, for even the wisest men tripped up sometimes. So, Andy, let's go up to the house now, and I'm sure the Mademoiselle will bring us something special. Your time. Chapter 7: A Mother's Struggle. When Eliza's footsteps left Uncle Tom's cabin, it was impossible to imagine anyone more desolate and lonely than she. Her husband's pain and danger, and the danger to the child was all intertwined in her mind. She was bewildered and shocked to realize just how much she was risking by leaving the only home she had ever known and the protection of friends she loved and respected. Then came the separation from everything familiar, the place where she grew up, the tree under which she played. In the grove where she had walked many times with her young husband in her happy days, under the clear, frosty starlight, everything seemed to speak to her reprovingly, asking her what she would do if she left such a home. Where can I go? But mother's love is stronger than anything else. The terrible danger is at hand, and maternal love becomes feverish and restless. Her child was old enough to walk around her, and she would have held his hand only in unimportant situations, but now the thought of taking him from her arms made her just shuddered. She nervously held him in her arms as she walked forward quickly. The frost-covered ground creaked under her feet, and she shivered all over. Every trembling leaf and fluttering shadow made her blood boil, and she quickened her pace. She marveled inwardly at the strength that seemed to spring from her, for she felt the weight of her child like a feather, and every throb of fear seemed to strengthen the supernatural strength of her advance, and from her pale bursting from the lips. It is a prayer often sung to friends in high places, Lord, save me. Lord, save me. If tomorrow morning, your Harry, your mother, or your Willie will be taken from you by a cruel businessman, take it away from you if you see the person and hear that the documents have been signed and delivered. And you only have time from 12 o'clock to dawn to complete your escape. How fast can you go? How many miles can you walk in these few short hours, with your dear child in your arms, his little head resting sleepily on your shoulder, and his soft little arms cradling your neck trustingly? The child is asleep. At first, the novelty and fear kept him awake, but his mother hurriedly suppressed his every breath and sound, and assured him that as long as he remained motionless, she would definitely save him. Mom, I don't need to stay awake, don't you? No, honey, go to sleep. If you want. But, Mom, you won't let him catch me if I fall asleep, right? No. May God bless me. Mother said. Her cheeks became paler, and her big black eyes were shining brightly. Are you sure, Mom? Yes, of course, said Mother. The sound startled herself, for it seemed to her that it came from an inner soul and had nothing to do with her. The boy rested his tired little head on her shoulder, and soon fell asleep. The touch of those warm arms, the gentle breath coming from the neck. It seems to add fire and spirituality to her movements. In her opinion, every gentle touch and movement of the child while he was sleeping was like a stream of electricity, injecting power into her body. The dominion of the mind over the body is sublime, and it renders the flesh and nerves for a time indestructible. Make your bones as tough as steel and make the weak so strong. Only then did she realize that she was many miles away on the open road from any trace of any familiar object. She often went with her hostess to visit some relatives in a small village not far from the Ohio River, and was very familiar with that road. Go there and escape across the Ohio River were the first hasty outlines of her escape plan. Beyond that she could only hope in God. When the horses and vehicles began to move on the road, she felt with that alertness that is characteristic of excited states and seemed to be an inspiration. Be aware that your hurried pace and absent-minded look may attract comments and suspicion from others. So she laid the boy down on the ground, straightened her clothes and hat, and moved forward as fast as she thought consistent with her appearance. In her little bundle, she prepared some cakes and apples, and used them to speed up the children, rolling the apples a few yards in front of them, and the children would run after them with all their might. After a while, they came to a dense forest, with a clear stream flowing through the forest. When the child said he was hungry and thirsty, she climbed over the fence with him, sat down behind a large stone that hid them, and gave him breakfast from her little bag. The boy felt strange and sad that she couldn't eat, as he put his arms around her neck. As she tried to stuff some of the cake into her mouth, she felt as if the air in her throat was choking her. No, no, dear Harry. Mummy can't eat until you're safe. We must keep walking, all the way to the river. She hurried to the road again, forcing herself to behave herself again. Move forward calmly. She was many miles away from any neighborhood that knew her. If she happened to meet someone who knew her, she thought, the family's well-known kindness would in itself make it impossible to suspect that she was a fugitive. Because she is white. There was no way she was known to be a person of color without rigorous investigation, and her children were also white, making it easier for her to escape without suspicion. In this way, she stopped at a neat farmhouse to rest at noon, and bought some dinner for her children and herself. For as the distance increased, the danger diminished and the supernatural strain on the nervous system lessened, and she found herself both tired and hungry. This kind-hearted woman, affable and chatty, seemed happy to have someone come in and chat with her. She also unhesitatingly accepted Eliza's suggestion that she was going to a little place to stay with her friends for a week, and she hoped with all her heart that this would prove to be entirely true. An hour before sunset, she walked into the village of Tell on the Ohio River. Even though I was exhausted and my steps were sore, my heart was still strong. The first thing she saw was the river, which, like the Jordan, stood between her and free Canaan on the other side. It was early spring, and the river was swollen and the waves were turbulent. Huge ice floes were swinging back and forth heavily in the turbid river water. Due to the special shape of the river bank on the Kentucky side, the land curves toward the water, and ice blocks are accumulated and retained in large quantities. The narrow river channel flows around the bend. The river channel is full of ice blocks, and the blocks are piled together, thus forming a temporary barrier to stop falling ice. The ice piled up, forming a huge, undulating raft that filled the entire river and stretched almost to the Kentucky shore. Eliza stood for a moment, thinking about the negative side of the matter, which she could see at a glance would certainly hinder the usual ferry operation. Then he turned around and walked into a small hotel on the shore and asked a few questions. The hostess was busily engaged in various fermentations and stews on the stove in preparation for supper, when Eliza's sweet, earthy voice attracted her, and she paused, fork in hand. "What's wrong?" she said. "Aren't there any ferries or steamers now to take people to be?" "Indeed," said the woman, "the boats have stopped." Eliza's look of astonishment and disappointment touched the lady, and she, "Maybe you want to take a break. Is anyone sick? Do you look anxious?" "I have a child in danger," said Eliza. "I heard nothing until last night. I walked a long way today in the hope of getting to the ferry." Sympathy was greatly aroused. "I'm so happy for you, Solomon," she shouted from the window to the small building behind. A man wearing a leather apron and dirty hands appeared at the door. "I said, Saul," the woman said, "will that man move the bar here tonight?" "He said, if it was prudent, he should give it a try," said the man. "There's a man down here. He'll drive up in the truck tonight if he wants. He'll be here for dinner tonight, so you'd better sit down and wait." "That's a lovely little fellow," added the woman, and gave him a piece of cake. But the child was exhausted and cried with exhaustion. "Poor fellow. He wasn't used to walking, and I was pushing him so hard," said Eliza. "Well, take him to this room," said the woman, opening a small bedroom in which lay a comfortable bed. Eliza laid the exhausted boy on the bed. "Hold his hand until he falls asleep soon." She didn't rest. The thought of her pursuers lit a fire in her bones, urging her onward, and she gazed longingly upon the sullen, rough sea that stood between her and freedom. Here, we must take our leave for now and continue to follow her footsteps. Although Mrs. Shelby had promised to get supper on the table quickly, it was soon discovered that, as so often seen before, it took more than one person to bargain. So even though the order was given within Haley's ear, and at least 6 or 7 little messengers delivered the order to Aunt Chloe, but the noble lady just gave a few very rude sneers, shook her head, and continued in an unusually leisurely and indifferent manner. For every operation, for some strange reason, there seemed to be a general consensus among the servants that the lady would not be particularly discourteous by her delay. Aunt Chloe watched and stirred carefully, replying without a second thought to all hasty suggestions that she didn't want the gravy to be served raw, as that would disturb anyone's appetite. From time to time, giggles came from the kitchen, saying, "Mr. Haley is having a hard time. He can't sit still. He can only walk up and down and across the porch." Aunt Chloe said angrily, "He is right. Save him." Aunt Chloe said angrily, "If he doesn't change his ways, one day he will be beaten black and blue. His master will send someone to find him. Let's see what he does then. He'll be tortured, there's no mistake," said little Jack. "He deserves it." Aunt Chloe said expressionlessly, "He broke a lot of people's hearts, I tell you," she said, pausing and raising her fork. "It's like what Mr. George read in the book of Revelation, the soul calling under the altar. Call upon God to avenge them. God will hear it, He will hear it." Aunt Chloe is well respected in the kitchen. Everyone listened to her with their mouths open. Now that dinner had been brought in, the whole kitchen was chatting and listening to her. Andy said, "It will be burned forever. There is nothing wrong with it, is there?" Little Jack said, "I am very happy to see it. I will be very happy. I am very happy to see it." "I'll be glad," said little Jack. "Cheelin'." A voice startled them all. It was Uncle Tom. He came in and stood at the door listening to their conversation. "Child, I'm afraid you don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Child," he said, "I'm afraid you don't know what you're talking about. Forever is a terrible word, and it's scary to think about. You shouldn't wish anyone to go on like this forever." "We won't say that to anyone except the sole driver," Andy said. "No one wants to tell them that they are too evil." Aunt Chloe said, "Don't nature weep? Don't they rip the suckling child from the mother's breast and sell it? Don't they tear the crying child from the mother's clothes and sell it? Don't they separate wives from husbands?" Aunt Chloe began to cry. "This is killing them. Don't they feel anything at all? God, what good is the devil if he doesn't get them?" Aunt Chloe covered her face with her plaid apron and began to sob in earnest. Tom said, "Pray for those who use you maliciously, the Bible says. Pray for them." Aunt Chloe said, "LOL, this is so hard. I can't pray for them." Tom said, "It's nature, Chloe. Nature is very powerful, but God's grace is even more powerful, besides. You should think about how horrible a poor brat's soul must be to do these things, and you should thank God that you're not like him, Chloe. I'd rather be sold 1,000 times over than let this poor guy take all the responsibility." "Me too," Jack said. "Lore. Should we pinch it, Andy?" Andy shrugged and whistled in acquiescence. Tom said, "I'm glad Mazer didn't leave this morning. He looked like he was going to leave. That would be more embarrassing than selling him. I'm sad. Maybe it's natural for him. But for me, who had known him since childhood, it was not easy, but I had met Moss, and I now began to feel somewhat at peace with God's will. Master can't help it. He did the right thing, but I'm worried that things will become easier after I leave. Mazer can't ask around and take care of everything like me. Children mean well, but their power is too little. This bothers me." The doorbell rang, and Tom was called into the drawing room. "Tom," said his master kindly, "I want your attention. I gave this gentleman a bond, and if you are not there when he comes for you, he will forfeit $1,000 to you. He has to attend to his other business today, and will leave it to you today. Go wherever you want, kid." Tom said, "Thank you, sir." "Watch yourself," said the businessman. "Don't use any of your nigger tricks against your master, for if you ain't there, I'll take every penny out of him. If he hears a word I say, he ain't gonna believe you, y'all, slippery as an eel." "Sir," said Tom, standing very straight. "When Mrs. put you in my arms, I was 8 years old and you were not yet a year old. She said, 'Tom, this is your little horse. Take good care of him,' she said. Now I think I ask you, Master, have I ever broken a promise to you or disobeyed you since I became a Christian?" Mr. Shelby was so moved that tears came to his eyes. "My dear boy," he said, "God knows you are telling the truth, and if I can help, the whole world will not blame you." Mrs. Shelby said, "I'm a devout Christian, as long as I can help it. I will definitely redeem you." "Sir," she said to Haley, "consider carefully who you will sell him to, and then tell me." Lor, yes, for that matter, said the merchant. I'll probably bring him back in a year, and he won't be too timid, and then switch him back. Then I'll make a deal with you and make it work in your favor, said Mrs. Shelby. Of course, said. I think that's what we all want. Mr. and Mrs. Shelby were both annoyed and ashamed of the businessman's shamelessness, but they both believed it was absolutely necessary to restrain their feelings. The more despicable and insensitive he appeared, the more Mrs. Shelby fears that he will succeed in recapturing Eliza and her child, the more, of course, she becomes motivated to use all feminine means to retain him. Therefore, she smiled kindly, agreed, talked familiarly, and did everything possible to make the time pass unconsciously. 2 o'clock. Sam and Andy led their horses to the sentry post, obviously refreshed and in high spirits after a morning of running around. Sam had just finished dinner and appeared there with a cheerful face. When Harley approached, he was happily boasting to Andy that he had come all the way. The operation was apparently a huge success. I think your master doesn't have a dog, Haley said thoughtfully as he prepared to mount his horse. Sam said proudly, there are many, Bruno is one of them, he is a growler. Besides, every one of us niggas got a puppy. Pooh. Harley said, and he also said something else about dogs, and Sam muttered. I don't think it's any use scolding them, there's no way. But your owner doesn't have a dog, I know it very well, he didn't have a dog to track down niggas. Sam knew exactly what he meant. But he still maintained a simple expression of seriousness and despair. Our dogs are all very sensitive to smells. I guess that's what they are, even though they've never practiced. But if you can get them going, they're long-range dogs and can do anything. Come on, Bruno, he shouted. Whistle to the lumbering Newfoundland dog, which waddled toward them. Go hang yourself. Haley stood up and said. Come on, roll over now. Sam immediately turned over and tickled Andy subtly while rolling over. Andy laughed, ha. This made Haley very angry and gave him a hard whip with the riding crop. I'm petrified of you, Andy, Sam said seriously. Andy, you're kidding. Don't do any tricks. You can't help Mars. Haley said decisively. I know all the roads, they're underpasses. Sodden, said Sam, that's what I thought. Mr. Haley hit the nail on the head. There are now 2 roads that lead to the river's dirt track. Which way do you want to go with the Spear Road? Andy raised his head and looked at Sam innocently. He was surprised to hear this new geographical fact, but immediately reiterated his words firmly. Because, Sam said, I'd rather believe Lizzie would take the dirt road because that's the road least traveled. Even though Harley is an old bird and is naturally suspicious of others. But his perspective on the matter was enlightening. If only you two weren't both damn liars, now would be great, he said after thinking for a moment. Andy said this in a thoughtful and reflective tone, which seemed to make Andy very happy, and he lagged a little behind, swaying. It was obviously very likely that he would be defeated, but Sam's expression always maintained the most painful seriousness. Of course, said Sam, Mars can do what he wants and take the straight path if Moss thinks is best, and that's the same for us. Now, when I look into it, I think a straight path is best. Of course. Of course she will take a lonely road, Haley said loudly. She thought about it and didn't pay attention to Sam's words. Nothing said, Sam said, girls are special, they never will do what you think they will do, but quite the opposite. Girls are naturally opposites, so if you think they're going one way, you'd better go another way and you'll be sure to find them. My personal opinion is that Liz took that path, so I think we'd better go in a straight line. This profound view of women in general doesn't seem to make Harley particularly inclined to take the straight path, and he decisively declares that he should go another way, asking Sam when they should go that way. There's still a little piece ahead, Sam said. Winking at Andy with his side of the eye, he added sternly, but I've looked into the matter, and it's clear to me that we shouldn't go that route. I've never thought about that. It's so lonely and we can get lost. Still, Haley said, I'm still going to take that road. Now that I think about it, I think I heard them say that road had fences up and down the creek. Right, Andy? Andy didn't not sure. He had heard of that road but had never walked it. In short, he was completely non-committal. Harley has a habit of weighing the pros and cons of lies, big and small, which he believes is in favor of said dirt track. Sam couldn't help but mention what he thought he had noticed at first. He tried to dissuade Sam in confusion, but then he thought about it and Sam didn't want to involve Lisa. So he lied regardless. So when Sam pointed the way, Haley darted briskly into the road, Sam and Andy following close behind. In fact, the road was an old road, formerly a thoroughfare to the river, but which had been abandoned for many years after the new Barracuda River was laid. The road is about an hour away and is then crossed by various farms and fences. Sam was well aware of the fact that, in fact, the road had been closed for a long time and Andy had never heard of it. So he rode, dutifully, except for the occasional groan. Said, it's too rough and not good for Jerry's feet. Haley said, now, let me remind you, I understand you, no matter how much you make a fuss, you will never let me leave this road, so stand up. Mars will go his own way. Sam said in frustration, winking at Andy. Andy's joy was close to breaking point. Sam's spirit was very good. He claimed to have always maintained very keen observation skills. Once he exclaimed that he saw a girl's hat on the top of a highland in the distance. Or shouting to Andy, isn't that Bliss down in the valley? He always uttered such exclamations at rough or steep points in the road where a sudden increase in speed would cause serious consequences for all parties involved. A particular inconvenience, so Harley was in a constant state of turmoil. After riding like this for about an hour, the whole team suddenly fell into the barn of a large farm. There was not a soul here, everyone was working in the fields, but as the barn was on the opposite side of the road, it stood out, obviously. Their journey in this direction has come to an end. Isn't this what I told Mazer? Sam said with hurt innocence. How can a strange gentleman know a country better than a native-born and bred native? You scoundrel, said Haley. You know all this. I told you I knew it, but don't you believe me? I told Mazer that it was all fenced off and I didn't know if we could get through. Andy, listen, here we go. It's all too true to argue. The unfortunate man had to swallow his anger with as much grace as he could muster, and all three of them turned to the right, lined up and headed towards the road. For various reasons, about 3/4 of an hour passed after Eliza put the child to bed in the village tavern. A group of people came to this place on horseback. Eliza was standing at the window, looking in another direction, and Sam caught a quick glimpse of her. Harry and Andy were just 2 yards behind. At this critical moment, Sam tried every means to get his hat blown off, and uttered a cry so loud and distinctive that it startled her, she took a sharp step back. The whole train passed by the window and rounded to the front door. To Eliza, that moment seemed to encapsulate countless lives. The side door of her room leads to the river. She picked up the baby. Run down the steps towards the river. The merchant caught a glimpse of her just as she disappeared over the bank. He jumped from his horse, called to Sam and Andy, and pursued her like a hound after a deer. At the moment when she was dizzy, her feet seemed to be almost touching the ground. We arrived at the water's edge in a short while. They followed closely behind her. She used the strength that God only gives to the desperate, screamed wildly, jumped over the fast current on the shore, and jumped onto the ice sheet outside the shore. It was a desperate leap. Nothing could be done but madness and despair. Haley. Sam and Andy instinctively yelled and raised their hands because she did. When her center of gravity fell on a huge piece of green crushed ice, the crushed ice made a crunching sound, but she did not stay there for a moment. She screamed wildly and jumped onto another piece of ice desperately. Jumped to another piece of ice, stumbled, jumped, slipped, jumped again. Her shoes were missing, the socks on her feet were cut, and there was blood at every step. But she could see nothing and feel nothing, until in her dream she dimly saw the side of Ohio. I saw a man helping her ashore. No matter who you are a brave girl, the man swore. Eliza recognized the voice and face of the man whose farm was not far from her home. Oh, Mr. Sims, save me, hide me. Elia said. What is this? The man said, Isn't this Shelby's daughter? My child. This kid. He sold him. She pointed to the Kentucky shore and said, His horses are there. Oh, Mr. Seamus, you have a little boy. I thought so. The man said as he roughly but kindly pulled her up the steep bank. Besides, you are a brave girl. I love being brave wherever I see it. As they climbed to the top of the bank, the man stopped. I'd be happy to do something for you, he said. But I have nowhere to take you now. I can only tell you where to go, he said, pointing to a large white house off the village's main street. Go there, they are good-hearted people. There is no danger there, but they will help you, they will do this kind of thing. God bless you, said Eliza earnestly. There's no cation in the world, the man said. Nothing I've done counts, of course, sir, you won't tell anyone. Go thunder, girl. What do you think you are? Of course not, said the man. Come, now, go like a sensible girl, as you are. Come, now, go like a likely, sensible gal, as you are. You have no freedom. You deserve it, to me. The woman took the child in her arms and walked away firmly and quickly. The man stood aside and watched her. Shelby, maybe you don't think this is the most neighborly thing to do, but alone what to do? Same thing if he catches my woman. He is welcome to pay back the money. Somehow, I always felt that no small animal would struggle and pant under the siege of dogs, trying to clarify itself. Besides, I don't see any reason for me to be a hunter and trapper for others. So said the poor pagan Kentuckian. He had not been educated in constitutional relations and was therefore betrayed into acting in a Christian manner which he would not have allowed himself to do had he been in a better and more enlightened situation. Harry watched this scene in amazement until Eliza disappeared on the river bank. Only then did he look blankly at Sam and Andy with questioning eyes. Sam said, "It's really a fair deal." I believe there are 7 devils inside this girl, Haley said. She jumps like a wild cat. Oh, said Sam, scratching his head. I hope Marth can forgive us for going that way. I don't think I'm strong enough to go that way, no way. Sam laughed hoarsely. You laughed, growled the merchant. God bless you, sir, I can't stand it now, said Sam. The long-suppressed joy was released. Spring is here, my God. How did she do it? Sam and Andy laughed until tears rolled down their cheeks. I'll make you laugh your ass off, the merchant said, and hit them on the head with his riding crop. Both men ducked away. Yelling, he ran up the bank and mounted his horse before he came up. Good evening, sir, Sam said seriously. I'm worried about Jerry. Mr. Haley won't want us anymore. The lady won't let us ride the animals across Liz Bridge tonight, he finished. He poked Andy in the ribs with a playful smile, and then set off, Andy following close behind, going at full speed, their laughter faintly carried in the wind. Chapter 8 Eliza's Escape. Gray mist enveloped her as she disappeared over the river bank, the rushing water and drifting ice forming a hopeless barrier between her and her pursuers. So Harley slowly and dissatisfiedly returned to the tavern to think further about what to do. The woman opened the door to a small living room for him. There was a tattered carpet in the living room, a shiny black oilcloth on the table, a few high-backed wooden chairs on the mantelpiece, several colorful plaster statues on the mantelpiece, and a lot of smoke on the mantelpiece. There was a long hardwood box next to the chimney, and Harley sat down here, meditating on the precarity of human hope and happiness. He said to himself, why would I want to be with this little bastard? How could I end up looking like a raccoon, like I am now? Harley said to himself again. He repeated a series of curses to himself. Although we have the best reasons to believe that these expletives are true, we have omitted them for a matter of taste. He was startled by the loud and discordant voice of a man who had apparently dismounted at the door. He hurried to the window. Oh my God. If this isn't the closest place to Providence I've heard people say, Haley said. I believe that's Tom Locker. Haley hurried out. Standing at the bar in the corner of the room he was a tall, muscular man, 6 feet tall and of broad proportions. He wore a buffalo leather coat with his hair hanging outwards, giving him an unkempt and sinister look, which was completely in line with his overall appearance and temperament. Every organ and line of the head and face expresses savage and unhesitating violence in a most developed state. In fact, if our reader imagines a cattle dog coming to man's property, and walking about in hat and coat, he will have an idea of the general style and effect of his physique. He was accompanied by a traveling companion who in many ways was a striking contrast to himself. He is short in stature. Slender in stature, light in movement, like a cat, with a pair of sharp black eyes showing a voyeuristic and gazing expression, every feature on his face seemed to resonate with these eyes, his long and slender nose stretched out, as if eager to explore the essence of things. He is smooth. The sparse black hair stretched forward eagerly, and all his movements and changes showed a capable and cautious sensitivity. The big man poured out a large, half-full glass of strong liquor and drank it without saying a word. The little man stood on tiptoes and turned his head first to one side, then to the other. I sniffed carefully in the direction of various wine bottles, and finally ordered a mint julep, my voice thin and trembling, my expression very cautious. When the wine was poured out, he took it and looked at it with a sharp and triumphant expression, like a man who thinks he has done something right. He pointed out the crux of the problem sharply, and then started to drink in small sips. "Oh, who would have thought that your good luck would come to me? What's the matter, Rocker, how are you?" Harley stepped forward and stretched out his hand to the big man. "Devil," is the civilized answer. "What brings you here, Haley?" The man named Max immediately stopped sipping, leaned his head forward, and looked at this new acquaintance shrewdly, like a cat sometimes watching a movement. Like dead leaves or other possible chasing targets. "I said, Tom. You are the luckiest man in the world. I'm faltering now. You have to help me." "That's enough," murmured his smug acquaintance. "One might say with great certainty when one is delighted to see them, something can be made of them. What happens now?" "You have a friend here?" Haley said, looking at Max suspiciously. "Maybe a partner?" "Yes, I do. Here you go, Max. This is my friend from Natchez. It would be nice to meet him," Max said, extending a slender hand like a crow's talon. "Mr. Haley, I presume?" "Me too, sir," Haley said. "Now, gentlemen, for the sake of how late we have met, I think I'm going to treat you all to a little appetizer in this living room. So, now, old man," he said to the man at the bar, "give us some hot water, sugar, cigars and plenty of real stuff. Let's get drunk. Look, the candles are lit, the fire in the stove is excited to the extreme, and our three distinguished guests are seated around a table, which is filled with all the things mentioned that enhance friendship." Haley began to talk piteously about his strange troubles. Locke closed his mouth and listened gruffly. Max was anxiously and restlessly mixing a can of punch to his own taste, occasionally looking up from his work. He almost poked Harley in the face with his pointed nose and chin, listening most attentively to Harley's entire narrative. The end of the story seemed to make him very happy, because he shook his shoulders and sides in silence, and his thin lips curled up slightly, looking like he was enjoying himself very much. "Say so. You've already sewn it, haven't you?" he said. "Him. He. It's also neatly sewn," Haley said frustratedly. "You young people's business has brought a lot of trouble to this industry." Max said, "If we can have a group of girls who don't care about their children now, tell you. I think that would be the greatest improvement I know," Max said with a quiet introductory sneer to complement his joke. "Yeah," Haley said, "I never got it. Young people give them caused a lot of trouble. Now people would think they would be happy to have them made clear, but they won't. The more troublesome and good-for-nothing the young people are, the tighter they stick to them." "Oh, Mr. Haley," Max said, "pass the hot water." "Yes, sir, that's how I and everyone else felt when I was doing this. I once bought a girl, and she was also a smart and good girl. I sold her to a man, and the man said that he wanted to try his luck in raising her, and it didn't cost much, so I sold her to her. I never thought she would do that, but, oh my gosh. You should see how she does it. In fact, in my opinion, she seemed to love that child more because the child was sick and disobedient and kept pestering her. She didn't believe it and cried and fussed about it, as if she had lost everything. My friend. It's so funny just thinking about it. A woman's ideas are really endless." Haley said, "I am the same way. Last summer, on the edge of the Red River, I found a girl to make a deal. The girl looked like a child, and her eyes looked like as bright as you, but I found him stone blind. In fact, he is blind. You see. I thought I could do no harm by letting him go without saying a word. I got him back with a barrel of whiskey, but to get him away from the girl, she was as good as a tiger. That was before we set off, and I hadn't tied up my gang yet. What was she going to do? She just climbed up on the cotton bale like a cat and snatched a knife from a sailor on the deck. I tell you, she made everyone fly until she saw that there was no use. He turned around and fell into the river, the young man and everyone else. I fell badly and never got up again. Bah. Tom Locke listened to these stories with irrepressible disgust and said, "Cut the nonsense, you both are. Mygelston kudipno suchines, it lie, Mygelston kudipno suchines, it lie, that's true." "How can you help?" Mac said cheerfully. "What can I do? Why, I bought a girl, and if she had a young man to sell, I would go over and punch her in the face and say, 'Listen, now, if you get one word out of your head, I just smash your face.' I didn't hear a word, not the beginning of a word. I said to them, 'This child is mine, not yours. You can't do anything with it. I'll sell it as soon as I get the chance. Be careful, don't ruin your splendor, or I'll make your life worse than death. I tell you.' When I got the money, they knew it wasn't a joke. I made them play cards like fish, and if any of them started to yelp, why, Mr. Rocker dropped his fist with a bang, which spoke volumes of his paws. That's what you call emphasis." Max said, poking the side of Haley's face and giggling again. "Isn't Tom weird?" I said, "Tom, I think you gotta let 'em know, 'cause all niggas have hairy heads. They never doubted what you meant, Tom. If you weren't the devil, Tom. You are his twin brother, I can say that." Tom accepted the compliment humbly, becoming affable and, as John Bunyan said, of his doggy nature. Haley had been quaffing the main meal of the evening. He began to feel that his moral cultivation had been significantly improved and enlarged, a phenomenon not uncommon for serious and thoughtful gentlemen under similar circumstances. "Well, Tom," he said, "you're really awful, I told you so, you know. Tom, you and I talked about these things all the time when we were in Natchez, and I proved to you that we made as much money as there was in the world, and as long as we were kind to them, we would be fine and still be. To maintain a better chance when the storm comes. Finally getting into the kingdom, you know what, there's nothing else to gain." Tom said, "Don't I know? Don't make me too sick with your stuff, my stomach is a little uncomfortable right now." Tom drank half a glass of brandy. "I said," Haley said, leaning back in his chair. Making an impressive gesture, "What I want to say now is that I have always wanted to run my business so that I can make money and, most importantly, be as good as anyone else. However, business is not everything, and money is not everything. Not omnipotent, because we all have souls. Now, I don't care who listens to me. And I think those words are scary, so I might as well say them. I believe in religion. One day, when I handle things properly, I will consider my soul and those things. So, what's the use of doing more bad things? Take care of your soul." Tom repeated contemptuously, "If you want to find the soul in you, you have to keep your eyes open and save yourself trouble in this regard. If the devil sifts you through a sieve of hair, he won't find you." "What's the matter, Tom, you're angry," Haley said. "Someone's talking to you now. Why can't you accept it happily?" "Hold your jaw," Tom said gruffly. "I can stand anything you say, but your piety is too much for me. After all, what's the difference between you and me? It's not that you care more. It's not that you have a little more emotion, it's that you are pure, and despicable like a dog, trying to deceive the devil and save yourself. Can't I see through it? And your so-called religion is too despicable for any miser. You have been dealing with the devil your whole life. Then when it comes time to pay wages, he runs away. Bob. Come on, gentlemen, I say, this is not business, Max said. You know, there are different ways of looking at any problem. There is no doubt that Mr. Haley is a good man and he has his own conscience. Tom, you also have your own ways. And that's all well and good, Tom, but, you know, quarreling accomplishes nothing. Let's get down to business. Now, Mr. Haley, do you want us to help you catch this girl? That girl has nothing to do with me, she's Shelby's, just the boy. What a fool I was to buy that monkey. You're generally a fool, said Tom gruffly. Max licked his lips and said, Okay, Rocker, stop thinking about it. Look, Mr. Haley has let us do a lot of good work, I guess. Don't move, your arrangement is my strength. This girl, Mr. Haley, how is she? Wow, white and handsome, pampered. I bought Shelby $800 or $1,000 and bought her. White, handsome, pampered, said Max, with his sharp eyes, nose and mouth, all full of enterprising spirit. Look here, now, Locker, a beautiful beginning. We run our own business here, we are responsible for fishing, the child belongs to Mr. Haley of course, and we take the girl to Orleans for speculation. Isn't this great? Tom's big mouth had been open during the communication, and now it's suddenly closed, like a big dog closing a piece of meat. He seemed to be leisurely digesting the idea. You see, Max said to Harley as he stirred the punch, we have judges handy at all the docks along the coast, and it's reasonable for them to do any little job in our line of work. Tom, who was responsible for taking those guys down. And I was dressed neatly, my boots were polished, and I said everything first and then the vows. You should understand now, Max said with professional pride, how capable I am. One day I'm Mr. Twickham from New Orleans, another day I had just come off my plantation in Pearl River, where I had 700 black slaves, and then again, I was a distant relative of Henry Clay, or some old guy from Kentucky. The talent is different, you know. Now, Tom yells when he is being. Not with him, not with Tom, you see, he's not born to lie. But, God, if there was a man in the country who could swear to anything and everything, and tell all the circumstances, and have a long face, do things better than me, why, I want to meet him, that's it. I believe it. Even if the judge is more critical than they are, I can handle it. Sometimes I really wish they could be more rigorous. If they could be more rigorous, it would be more interesting, you know. Tom Locke is a person who thinks and moves very slowly. We've already made him look like a slow man, and here he interrupts Max, banging his heavy fist on the table, bringing all the noise back to life. That's it, he says. God bless you, Tom, you didn't have to break all the glasses, said Max. Save your fists for when you need them. Haley said, but, gentlemen, can't I get a piece of the action? Isn't it enough for us to help you catch the kid? Rocker said. What do you want? Wall, Haley said, if I give you this job. It's worth something, say 10% profit, fees paid. Now, said Locke with great oath, and banging his heavy fist on the table, don't I know you, Dan Harry? Don't think you can defeat me. What if Max and I got into the fishing business just to sell gentlemen like you and get nothing for ourselves? Didn't you show us the game? I wish we were as free as you are. If you or Shelby want to chase us, look where the partridges were last year. If you find them or us, you're more than welcome. Oh, Wall, of course, forget it, Haley said in panic. You caught that boy for work. You made a long-distance deal with me, Tom, you keep your word. Arrive. You know, Tom said. I'm not a crybaby like you, but I won't lie with the devil. I mean what I say and you know that, Dan Harry. That's right, I told you, Tom, Haley said, as long as you promise to deliver the baby to me within a week, anywhere you want. This is what I want. Tom said, but that's not all I want. Don't you think I did business with you in Natchez for nothing, Haley? When I caught an eel, I learned how to catch it. You gotta hand over the $50, or the kid will. Don't try to get ahead. I know. Haley said, why, Tom, you're reasonable when you've got a job in hand that's probably going to bring you about $1,600 in net profit. Yes, isn't our business already booked for 5 weeks? If we drop everything. You go hunting in the jungle with you young men, but in the end you fail to catch the girls, and girls are beyond the reach of the devil, and then what? Will you pay us a penny? I think I saw you doing ugh. No, put down your $50. If we get it done, we pay. I'll give you the money back. If it doesn't work out, just think we've caused you trouble. That's a long way, isn't it, Max? Of course, Max said in a conciliatory tone. It's just a retainer fee. Look, him, he. We lawyers, you know. Wall. We all have to keep a good attitude and stay calm, you know. Tom will give the baby to you, no matter what your name is, won't you, Tom? Locker said, if I find that young man, I'll take him to Cincinnati and leave him at Grandma Belcher's. Right on the dock. Max took out a greasy little notebook from his pocket, took out a long piece of paper, sat down, stared at the contents of the paper with his sharp black eyes, and began to mutter to himself, Barnes Shelby County Boy Jim, $300, dead or alive. Edwards Dick and Lucy man and wife, $600. Polly and 2 children she or her head, $600. I was just checking our business and looking at us. Can you handle this easily? Rocker, he said after a pause. We've got to get Adams and Springer to track these guys down. They've been on their radar for a while. Tom said, they're asking too much. I'll take care of it, they're still in this business. When you are young, you have to learn to do things cheaply, Max said, continuing to read. 3 of their cases are easy, because you just shoot them or swear they've been killed, and of course they don't charge much for it. The other cases, he said, folding the paper, have to be. Take a moment. Now let's talk about the specifics. Did you see this girl come ashore? Of course, just like I saw you, and there's someone on the shore to help her? Rocker said. That's true, it's quite possible, said Max, that she's locked up somewhere, but where, that's the question. What do you say, Tom? Tom said, we must cross the river tonight and we can't make any mistakes. But there's no boat nearby, Max said. The ice floe is very powerful, Tom. Is it dangerous? Tom said decisively, it's nothing, it just has to be done. Oh my God, Max faltered, he said, walking to the window. It's as dark as a wolf's mouth, Tom. Long story short, you're scared, Max. But there's nothing I can do about it, you've got to go. If you want to stay here for a day or 2, wait for that girl to be taken to the Underground Railroad, get it to Sandusky, and then you go. Oh, no, I'm not scared at all, Max said. It's just what? Tom said. Well, about the boat. You see, there's no boat. I heard the woman say that there's a boat coming tonight, and someone's going to take the boat over. Neck or no neck, we have to go with him. Tom said. Haley said. I think you have a nice dog. First class, Max said. But what's the use, you don't have her scent. Yes, I do, Haley said proudly. It's hers. In her haste she had forgotten her shawl on the bed, her hat too. That man is lucky, Rocker said. Fork over. Haley said, though the dogs might hurt her if they bit her when she wasn't wearing any clothes. Max said. That's a problem too. One time in Mobile our dogs tore a man in half. We didn't get them away before we could get rid of them. Haley said, well, you see, for a good person, that's impossible, you see, Haley said. I see. Max said. Besides, if she gets caught, she can't leave. Dogs are not counted in your states, and of course, you cannot track them. They only move on plantations, and if a nigger goes there, he has to run on his own without anyone to help him. All right. Locker, who had just walked up to the bar to inquire, said, they said that man came with the ship, so, Max dash. The respectable man glanced dejectedly at the comfortable residence he was about to leave, but he slowly stood up and obeyed the order. After exchanging a few words about further arrangements, Haley handed Tom the $50 with obvious reluctance, and the three parted ways that night. If our refined Christian readers object to the society this scene brings them into, let us plead with them to begin promptly and defeat their prejudices. We remind them that whaling is becoming a legitimate patriotic profession. What if all the vast land between the Mississippi River and the Pacific Ocean became one vast marketplace for bodies and souls? Were human property to maintain the locomotive trend of the 19th century, it would be possible for merchants and trappers to join the ranks of our aristocracy. While this scene was playing out in the tavern, Sam and Andy happily embarked on their way home. Sam is full of wings. He expresses his excitement with all kinds of supernatural howls and roars, as well as all kinds of weird movements and body contortions. Sometimes, he would sit back and put his face against the horse's tail and sides. Then, with a woo, he would stand up from the horse again, straighten his face, and start to lecture Andy in a high-pitched voice. Said he shouldn't laugh or act stupid. Then, he slapped his sides with his arms and let out bursts of laughter. The laughter passed through the old woods and resounded into the sky. Through all these movements he managed to keep the horse at top speed until between 10 and 11 o'clock. The horse's heels clicked on the gravel at the end of the balcony. Mrs. Shelby darted to the railing. Is it you, Sam? Where are they? Mr. Haley is resting in the tavern. He is very tired, Mississippi. Where is Eliza, Sam? Wall, she has crossed Jordan. As one man said, in the land of Canaan. Why, Sam, what do you mean? Gasped Mrs. Shelby, who was almost fainting, for a sudden thought occurred to her of what the words might mean. Val, miss, God stands by his own principles. Lizzie had crossed the river to Theo, and it was as if God had taken her away with fire and 2 horses. In front of the hostess, Sam's piety was always unusually fanatical, and he combined biblical figures and images as your own capital. Come up, Sam, said Mr. Shelby. He followed to the balcony. Tell your mistress what she wants. Come, Emily, he said, putting his arm around her. You are shivering with cold. You are letting yourself feel too much. It feels too much. Am I not a woman, a mother? Aren't we all accountable to God for this poor girl? Oh my God, please don't blame us for this. What crime, Emily? You know it yourself, we just did what we had to do. Mrs. Shelby said, but I still feel a terrible sense of guilt. I can't explain it. Come on, Andy, you nigger, stay alive. Sam called from the balcony, lead your horses to the barn, don't you hear Moss barking? Sam soon appeared at the living room door, holding palm leaves in hand. Now, Sam, tell us what happened, said Mr. Shelby. Where is Eliza, if you know? Sir, I saw her crossing the ice floe. She lived. It went smoothly, which was no less than a miracle. I even saw a man helping her up the river Scioto. Then she disappeared into the dusk. Sam, I think this is a fantasy, this miracle. It's not that easy to cross the river on an ice floe, said Mr. Shelby. Don't be nervous. Without God, no one can do it. Sam said, this is your way. Mr. Haley and I, and Andy. We came to the tavern by the river, and I rode a little ahead. I wanted to be a concubine so much, so I couldn't insist on it. When I walked to the door of the tavern, she was indeed there, right there. In full view, they dug holes in the back. I took off my hat and sang loudly. Lizzie, of course, screamed as Mr. Haley passed the door, and she ducked back, and then, I tell you, she crawled out of the side door. She went down the bank, and Mr. Haley spotted her and screamed with a cry. He, Andy and I followed. She went down to the river, where the current was more than 10 feet wide. On the ice on the other side, the ice swayed up and down like a big island. We were following her, and I thought he must have caught her, when she let out a scream I had never heard before, and there she was, on the other side of the current, on the ice, screaming and jumping. The noodles cracked, click, 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 click. She bolted like a buck. God, this girl has such nice springs, I really admire her. Mrs. Shelby was completely silent, her face pale with emotion, as Sam told his story. God bless her, she's not dead. God will protect us, Sam said piously, rolling his eyes. As I have been saying, you are God's will, and there is nothing wrong with it, just as Miss has been teaching us. All of this is to obey God's will. If it hadn't been for me, she would have been captured several times today. Did I let the horse set off this morning and chase her until dinner time? Didn't I drive Mr. Haley's car 5 miles away that night? Otherwise, he would have caught up with Lissy as easily as a dog chasing a raccoon. It's all God's will. Master Sam, you have to be careful. In my territory, I will not allow gentlemen to behave like this, said Mr. Shelby, as sternly as he could under the circumstances. Now it is believed that it is less useful to be angry with a Negro than with a child. Both will instinctively see the truth of the matter, and not subject to any contrary influence. Sam was not in the least disheartened by this rebuke, though he stood with an affected frown, and the corners of his mouth lowered, in the most contrite manner. Sir is right, absolutely right. It looks ugly to me, that's undisputed. Mr. and Mrs. certainly do not encourage such behavior. I know that, but a poor nigger like me wants to look bad sometimes because someone beats a guy like Mr. Haley black and blue. He's never a real man. Anyone who grew up the way I did will see this. Well, Sam, said Mrs. Shelby, now that you seem to have understood your mistake correctly, you can go tell Aunt Chloe and ask her to get you some leftovers from today's dinner. Cold ham. You and Andy must be hungry. Sam said, the lady has been very kind to us, and he bowed cheerfully, and left. As previously hinted, we will find that Master Sam has a talent. No doubt, this talent could allow him to rise to prominence in political life. This talent is that he can turn everything into capital and invest it to gain his own special praise and glory. He shows his piety and humility to the satisfaction of everyone in the living room, and then he takes photos. The palm leaves on the head are padded with a rough and free look. Head to Aunt Chloe's territory to show off her skills in the kitchen. Sam said to himself, I'm going to give you niggas a speech, now I've got a chance. Oh my God, I'm going to make them jaw drop. It must be pointed out that one of Sam's great pleasures was to follow his master on horseback to various political rallies. At those rallies, he would either sit on the railings or perch in a tall tree, watching the orator's speeches with the most obvious interest, and then he went among the various brethren who were assembled for the same purpose, and beguiled and amused them with the most ridiculous farces and imitations, all performed with the calmest seriousness and dignity, although the audience around him was generally all his own skin color. But there were also lighter-skinned listeners, who smiled and listened to Sam's self-absorption. In fact, Sam regarded speaking as his calling and never missed an opportunity to boast about his position. There has been an ancient grudge between Sam and Aunt Chloe. Or rather a decided indifference, but, as Sam was contemplating what to do in the supply department, as a necessary and obvious basis for his action, he determined on this occasion to appear conspicuously conciliatory, for he knew very well, although the Mrs. Orders would no doubt be strictly followed, he would also gain considerable benefit by enlisting moral support. So he appeared before Aunt Chloe with a touchingly low, resigned expression. Like a man who had endured immeasurable suffering for his persecuted countrymen, he made much of the fact that he had been directed by Mademoiselle to come to Aunt Chloe to redress the balance between his solid and liquid states. Thus a clear acknowledgement of her rights and supremacy in the culinary department, and everything connected with it. That's how it happened. No poor, simple, virtuous creature could be more easily moved by Uncle Sam's gallantry than Aunt Chloe. If he had been the prodigal son, he would not have received more maternal love than this. Soon, he found himself sitting in front of a large tin plate, his face filled with happiness and glory, and on the plate were 2 or 3 days' worth of milk. All the food that appears on the table. Fragrant ham, golden tortilla pieces, pieces of pie, chicken wings, gizzards, and drumsticks of various mathematical shapes, all mingled picturesquely together, and Sam, the lord of all he beheld, sat with his arms raised in delight. Palm fronds, patronizing Andy on his right. The kitchen was filled with his companions. They hurriedly squeezed in from various cabins, wanting to hear the results of today's battle. Now was Sam's moment of glory. Sam, like some of our fashionable bozos, never allows a story to lose any of its luster as it passes through his hands. After listening to the story, everyone burst into laughter. The friends were also laughing so hard, some were lying on the floor, and some were lying in various corners. Amidst the noise and laughter, Sam always maintained a serious expression, only raising his eyes from time to time and casting various indescribable dull glances at the audience. But there was no deviation from his passionate speech. "Look, fellow citizens," Sam said weakly, holding up a turkey leg, "look what your Chileans are doing now, to protect you all, yes, all of you. He wants to arrest one of our people. It's like trying to catch us all, you see, the principle is the same, that is, clarity. Any one of your drivers who gets wind of this and comes to trouble our people, why, I'm blocking his way. I'm the one he's looking for, I'm the one you all are looking for, kids. I will stand up for your rights and I will resist them until my last breath. Andy said, "What's the matter, Sam? You just told me this morning that you were going to help your Mars find Lizzie. It seems to me that your conversations were inconsistent." "Andy, I'll tell you now," said Sam with a terrible air of superiority. "You don't talk about things you know nothing about. Kids like you, Andy, mean well, but they can't be seen as colluding with the great principles of action." Andy scolded him, especially the harsh word, collusion. While most of the younger members of the company seemed to think this was a foregone conclusion, Sam continued. "That's conscience, Andy. When I thought about being with Lizzie, I suddenly thought of Mars as that kind of person. When I found out that Miss thought the opposite, it was more conscience. Because anyone who insists on siding with the lady will get more, so you see, I will insist on it no matter what, stick to my conscience, and stick to my principles." "Yes, principles," Sam said, shaking his chicken neck enthusiastically. "I wonder, what's the use of principles if we don't stick to them?" "Andy, you can eat that bone, it's not clean yet." Sam's audience listened to him with their mouths open, and all he could do was go on, about persistence, niggas, Sam led. He said it with an air of entering into a profound topic. "Your perseverance is something that no one can explain clearly. You see, when a person insists on doing something one night and regrets it the next day, people will say, 'Why did he know? Pass me that tortilla, Andy.' But let's see. I hope gentlemen and ladies don't mind me saying this. Here you go, I want to get the hay to the top, I put my piggy food on your side, but I won't go because I don't try any more on that side, but I put my piggy food on the opposite side, shouldn't I insist? I'm hell-bent on figuring out which side my kitchen is on, don't you see, it's all on you?" Aunt Chloe muttered, "It's the only thing you're stuck with, God knows." Aunt Chloe began to grow restless. Tonight's joy seemed to her a bit like a biblical metaphor, like vinegar on saltpetre. "Yes, indeed," said Sam, standing up, full of dinner and glory, ready to make one last effort. "Yes, my friends, ordinary citizens and ladies of the other sex. I have principles, I am proud of my principles, they are the prerequisite of this age and of all times. I have principles, and I adhere to them like a 40-year-old. As long as I think it is a principle, I will do it. I will not mind if they burn me alive, I will go to the stake, and I will say that for my principles, for my country, for the overall benefit of society, I will shed my last blood here." Aunt Chloe said, "One of your rules is to go to bed early tonight. Don't let us all stay up until dawn. Now every one of you young men who don't want to be beaten had better cheer me up, very suddenly. Niggers. It's all up to you," Sam said, waving the palm leaves kindly. "I wish you all the best, go to bed now and be a good boy." In this solemn prayer, the venue dispersed. Chapter 9. The senator seems to be just one person. Senator Byrd is taking off his boots and preparing to put on a pair of beautiful new slippers that his wife bought for him during his visit to the Senate. Sewn. Lady Byrd, with a look of joy on her face, supervised the setting of the table, and from time to time spoke admonishing words to a few playful children, who were happily playing with the things that had surprised their mothers since the flood. All sorts of ulterior games and pranks. "Tom, don't touch the doorknob, someone's coming." Mary, don't pull the cat's tail, poor kitty." "Jim, you mustn't climb on the table, no, no." Honey, you don't know what a surprise it is for all of us to see you here tonight. I said a few words to my husband. Yes, I think I should take a trip and spend the night here and make myself comfortable at home. I'm so tired and I have a terrible headache. Mrs. Bird glanced into the half-open closet camphor bottle, and seemed to want to approach it, but was interrupted by her husband. No, Mary, don't go to the doctor. All I want is a nice hot cup of tea from you and our wonderful family life. Legislation is such a nuisance. The senator smiled, as if he liked to think of himself as a victim of his country. Okay. What are they doing in the Senate? His wife said as business on the coffee table grew quieter. The gentle Mrs. Bird never cared about national affairs. She thought she had enough things to do. Therefore, Mr. Bird opened his eyes in surprise and said, "Not very important, okay, but did they actually pass a law prohibiting people from giving food and drink to those poor people of color? I heard they were discussing such a law, but I don't think so any Christian legislative body would pass it." Mary. You suddenly look like a politician. No, that's nonsense. I'm generally dismissive of your political views, but I think this is simply cruel and ungodly. Dear, I wish no such law had been passed. A law had been passed. Forbid people to help the slaves coming over from Kentucky, dear. These reckless abolitionists have done so much of this that our Kentucky brethren are so agitated that it seems necessary for our state to do something to quell this exciting emotion. This was nothing more than an act of Christian kindness. What is the law? The law does not prohibit us from letting those poor souls stay for a night, give them some comfort food and a few old clothes. Why, yes, dear, you know, that is abetment. Mrs. Bird is a timid, blushing little woman. About 4 feet tall, with a pair of gentle blue eyes, a complexion like peach blossoms, and the gentlest and sweetest voice in the world. As for courage, a medium-sized rooster's crow can scare her out of her wits, and a medium-sized stout the domestic dog can make her submit just by showing her teeth. Her husband and children were her whole world, and she ruled over them more by entreaty and persuasion than by command or argument. Only one thing could rouse her to wrath, and that irritation was based on her unusually gentle and compassionate nature. Anything cruel could throw her into passions which, in proportion to the prevailing softness of her nature, were all the more shocking and inexplicable. Generally speaking, she is the most tolerant and easily entreated of all mothers. But her children still vividly remember one of the harshest punishments she ever meted out to them, when she caught them, along with some uncultured boys in the neighborhood, stoning a defenseless kitten. Master Bill often said, "I tell you, I was scared that time. My mother got angry at me and I thought she was crazy." Before she could figure out what was going on, she was whipped and thrown into bed without even eating supper. Then I heard my mom crying outside the door, and that hurt me more than anyone else. "I tell you," he said, "we've never stoned a kitten again." At this time, Mrs. Bird stood up quickly, her cheeks were red, and she looked much more energetic. She walked to her husband and spoke firmly, saying, I know. Now, John. I was wondering if you think such a law is correct and Christian. You wouldn't kill me, Mary, if I said I was going to kill you. I really didn't expect you to say that, John.